Chapter 996. If it was an ancient god like Kingu, there was no need for him to take over Enkidu's body. This would lower his own status, so that Kingu must be an impostor as well. But Kingu was Tiamat's son, which was quite fitting for the impostor Enkidu. Speaking of which, Merlin told me something through the stone tablet. Oh, Gilgamesh showed an interested expression. It was obvious that Merlin was also hiding something from Gilgamesh. Merlin cast an illusion on Tiamat when he was in the Utopia, and kept Tiamat in a state of deep sleep, which led to Gorgon's appearance. Wuming told Gilgamesh about the letter Merlin wrote that he obtained from Anna. Kingu used the Holy Grail to connect Tiamat's 100-beast embryo authority to Gorgon's body, so that Gorgon could use the 100-beast embryo authority that was still in Tiamat's body, and through Gorgon's death, he could affect Tiamat and cause her to wake up from the illusion. For the record, this was something that Merlin discovered later. When Wuming used force to injure Tiamat's transformed Gorgon and caused Gorgon to return to normal, Tiamat woke up for a short while, but she immediately fell into a deep sleep. But even though it was only for a short while, it still caused serious injuries to Merlin. But because Tiamat did not wake up, Merlin did not suffer any fatal injuries. In other words, Gorgon's exit caused Tiamat to wake up. Gilgamesh did not blame Wuming. After all, Gorgon was an existence that had to be defeated, and Tiamat waking up was just a matter of time. Actually, I had a rough guess. I wanted to keep Gorgon and wait until I had prepared my trump card before attacking Gorgon, but Gorgon's state was really strange. I was afraid that something would happen if I delayed it too long, so I let Gorgon leave. Gilgamesh nodded and did not blame Wuming. In addition to Gorgon's mental state being abnormal, there was another important reason. Gorgon had already fought his way to the north wall, and Gorgon couldn't possibly break through the wall. Furthermore, knowing that the enemy was goddess Tiamat was not without its benefits. At the very least, he knew that defeating goddess Tiamat would save the singularity. By the way, is Siduri still with the feathered serpent god? Gilgamesh suddenly asked. Wuming could not help but look at Gilgamesh. Why would he ask about Siduri at a time like this? This was obviously a personal matter, and it was unlikely that Gilgamesh would ask about it. But Wuming thought of Gilgamesh's clairvoyance. If Wuming did not arrive in time, Siduri would have undoubtedly been killed and assimilated into the monster. Wuming happened to see the monster being born from the body of the killed villager when he arrived, and he had to admit that it was quite disgusting, both psychologically and physically. Gilgamesh probably saw something bad in the future. But it was scary but not dangerous. Wuming smiled faintly. With Wuming, an existence that did not belong to this world, any fate that was linked to Wuming would deviate from its fixed path. That was certain. Although his expression did not change, Gilgamesh clearly sighed in relief. Familiar with Gilgamesh, he could see that. But before Wuming could show an expression of ridicule, Gilgamesh immediately spoke. The Uruk is protected by this king and your power. You should go and support Chaldea and Ishtar. They are the main fighting force at the moment. Gilgamesh waved his hand, and the seat under Wuming shattered. Without another word, he chased Wuming out. After all, the king also cared about his reputation. How could he let Wuming laugh at him? It's still swift and fierce, Wuming said softly as he walked out of the divine tower. Looking at the canopy that shrouded the entire Uruk, as well as the sporadic magic beasts and monsters that could not enter the canopy, Wuming finally felt relieved. At least the Uruk was safe. Wuming leaped and flew directly into the sky. He penetrated the protective light film and killed the few Kururu and monsters along the way. Then, he flew in the direction of the Persian Gulf. Gilgamesh, who was at the top of the divine tower, looked at Wuming through the open window with his sharp eyes. He picked up the clay tablet at the side again. Being calm in the face of change was also the way of a king. In the direction of the Persian Gulf, Wuming would kill Kururu and monsters whenever he encountered them. Wuming, who had almost unlimited magic power, was not someone these things could stop. Soon, Wuming flew to a position close to the Persian Gulf. However, Wuming frowned. Although it was not obvious, Wuming could see that the sea level was rising. Not only that, but the ground was almost full of the figures of those monsters. They were densely packed, like bees crowded in a hive. Most of the monsters were moving toward the Uruk, and a small number of them scattered in all directions. It seemed that these monsters knew how to kill. But unfortunately, except for Uruk and Erech Metropolis, the people of other cities had already taken refuge in the Uruk half a year ago. It could be said that if it were not for the Quetzalcoatl, the people of Uruk and Erech Metropolis would also have gone to the Uruk. However, it was precisely because the people of these two cities did not go to the Uruk that the burden on the Uruk was reduced, which could be regarded as a pleasant surprise. Even if these monsters did not go to the Uruk, they could only go to Erech Metropolis and Uruk. At the moment, those two cities were protected by Finbaba, Leopard Man, Anna, and the missing Gadazi and others. In all likelihood, they went to the Quetzalcoatl's territory. Wuming did not have to worry at all. Looking into the distance, Wuming found that the distant sky was covered by dark clouds. For some reason, he could not see the situation on the sea clearly. He could only see some monsters floating on the sea. Wuming saw them very clearly, but these monsters were motionless as if they were in an incubator. Sure enough, they climbed up from the sea. These monsters were related to Tiamat, and Tiamat was in the Persian Gulf, so it was not surprising that these monsters climbed up from the Persian Gulf. Compared to the monsters on the ground and in the sea, the number of winged mermaids in the sky was not many. No, it was not that there were not many, but these magical beasts had become breeding grounds for the monsters. One after another, Kurur flew to the ground, allowing the monsters to kill them. Then a new monster was born from the body of the killed Kurur. Chapter 997. Perhaps it was because they had absorbed Kuru, these monsters were taller than the other monsters that came ashore from the sea. Their bodies were bigger too. Their originally shriveled and weak bodies had become slightly bulkier. They looked a little stronger. However, Wu Ming wasn't here to see the demons and monsters. No matter how powerful these monsters were, as long as the final enemy, Tiamat, was defeated, these things would naturally fall apart without a fight. Wu Ming was there to discuss with Gadazi and the others. Let's go to Erech Metropolis and UR City. In fact, Wu Ming could sense Ishtar's general location through the contract between him and Ishtar. That location was in the direction of the dense forest. Moreover, Wu Ming did not see Gadazi all the way from Uruk. The probability of her being killed by these monsters was too low. It could be said that it was almost zero. Putting Matthew aside, Quizzard and Ishtar, the two Venus goddesses, were also there. Moreover, the first Hassan might be hiding in the dark to follow Gadazi and the others. In short, Gadazi would definitely be fine. In this way, Wu Ming would think that Gadazi and the others had gone to the dense forest. After killing all the Kuru that surrounded them, Wu Ming did not intend to kill the monsters on the ground. In the entire Mesopotamia, other than the guards at the north wall, there were only humans in the dense forest of Uruk and the Quetzalcoatl. Wu Ming did not encounter Gadazi and the others along the way, which meant that they had gone to the dense forest. The Uruk had Wu Ming's one-time use relic as insurance. The north wall was too far away from here. Gadazi and the others were in the dense forest. All three places with humans were safe. Wu Ming did not need to kill these monsters that would continue to be produced. It was still the same statement: after defeating the goddess Tiamat, all problems would be solved. UR City and Erech Metropolis were not far from the Persian Gulf. Not only Wu Ming, but the monsters also soon arrived at these two places. Outside UR City, Finbaba did not have time to build a vine barrier as the monsters came one after another not long after Finbaba arrived. Hence, UR City was still the same as before, with only the dense forest around it as a natural defense. However, the dense forest was a natural hiding place for these monsters. It could be said that the dense forest did not help. However, it was fortunate that Finbabar was not fighting alone. A figure was flying in the sky. Several flashes of light flashed from the huge bow-shaped weapon of the figure from time to time. Countless monsters were blown away, and the energy generated from the explosions was enough to shatter these monsters. On the ground, a figure was wreaking havoc among the monsters. The explosions did not affect or damage this figure at all. Instead, every monster that came into contact with this figure would be split in half. This was the effect of the strangle skill. These two figures were Ishtar and Quetzalcoatl, the two goddesses of Venus. On the other hand, Gadotsi and Matthew gathered the people in Ur City and gathered them in a house that occupied a relatively large area. Quick, everyone come here. Funbaba took the opportunity to summon vines outside the house to surround it. Considering that the limbs of the monsters were quite sharp, Funbaba's vine barrier, whether it was in Eric Metropolis or here, was thicker and could automatically regenerate. It did seem powerful and effective, but it also meant that Funbaba had to spend a lot more mana, energy, and time to use it. And because the monsters were approaching, Gadotsi and Matthew kept gathering the people here. They wanted to let the people gather in one house first. After all, building a vine barrier around this big house was much easier than building one around the entire UR city. Fortunately, Ishtar and Quizzard were helping to deal with the monsters, so Funbaba had time to build the vine barrier. But probably because the humans discovered signal was sent to the group, the number of monsters increased, and Ishtar and Quizzard gradually found it difficult to deal with them. Unable to focus on Funbaba, Gadotsi, and the people behind them, the two of them had to concentrate on fighting the monsters. And because of this, the two cunning people accidentally exposed a few of the monsters, and allowed them to rush to the house that had not yet been fully built. Chaos. The monsters rushed toward Gadotsi with an incomprehensible voice. Matthew dashed behind Gadotsi. Senpai, please be careful. Matthew blocked the monster and looked at Gadotsi worriedly. Gadotsi did not care about his words of comfort because she saw a few more monsters running to the front of the house. If the monsters were to enter, it would be terrible. However, Matthew was already having a hard time dealing with one monster, so he did not have time to deal with the other monsters. Funbaba, please? Gadotsi had no choice but to ask Funbaba for help. However, Funbaba was minding his own business and ignored Gadotsi. At this moment, a figure rushed out of the house. It was the winner from before. He held a wooden stick in his hand and rushed to the monster under the surprised gazes of the other residents. It seemed that he wanted to stop it, even if the price was death. Be careful! Gadotsi could not help but shout. However, in the next second, the wooden stick of the winner was cut off by the monster, and its blade-like forelimbs slashed across the winner. However, under the shocked expressions of everyone, including Ishtar and Quizzard, the monster turned its head in puzzlement. In the next second, the golden chain passed through the monster's head, and the monster turned into ashes. Walalalo dash. Poochie. The monsters that crossed the line of defense of the two Venus goddesses were all killed by the chains that penetrated their brains and turned into ashes. The one Matthew dealt with was no exception. Could it be Kingu? Matthew immediately guarded Gadotsi. Kingu had just reported his identity near the Persian Gulf, and Kingu's fighting style was very similar to this scene. It was inevitable that Matthew would be mistaken. Clang! The broken wooden stick fell to the ground, and the smooth cut meant that the monster's forelimbs were sharper than expected. Lord Hyunryong, the winner, slumped to the ground as if he had just survived a disaster. He muttered with excitement and gratitude. In the next second, Wuming descended from the sky and landed in front of the winner. Chapter 998. That's right, the attack just now wasn't Kingu, but Wuming's. Seeing Wuming's arrival, Ishtar and Quizzard were relieved and no longer paid attention to them. Instead, they focused on dealing with the monsters. Even if there was something missing, Wuming would cover it up, so they didn't have to worry about it at all. On the other side, the winner touched his body with lingering fear. He clearly remembered that the monster just split him open. As expected of Hyunryong, the use of space magic is superb. The device on Gadotsi's wrist issued Roman's exclamation. Space magic. Gadotsi was puzzled. Senpai, it's actually like this. After all, Matthew was a servant. He saw the scene that just happened, so he simply explained it to Gadotsi. When Rama's attack slashed down, Matthew saw a very thin space crack appeared in front of the winner. The size was just enough to accommodate Ramu's attack. When Ramu passed by the winner, it actually entered another space, so the winner naturally had nothing to do with it. So that's how it is, I didn't see it. Sure enough, assassin is very reliable. Grazie smiled foolishly, which made Matthew didn't know how to complain. On Wuming's side, he heard the conversation between Grazie and others, but he didn't interrupt Wuming. Indeed, as Roman and Matthew said, Wuming used the so-called space magic, the portal to help the winner block the attack. Looking at the winner, sitting on the ground, Wuming spoke. There are many ways to atone for your sins. Death is just an escape. You won't feel at ease in the underworld. Senpai, Hyunrim-sama. I'm sorry. The winner lowered his head guiltily. You're not only carrying your own life, but also that person's life. This is the life of two people. Live well. He patted the winner on the shoulder and then left the winner sitting on the ground with a thoughtful look. Wuming walked toward Grazie while looking at Funbaba. Funbaba, go and help Ishtar and Quizzard. Woo-woo. Funbaba immediately joined the battlefield. Assassin! Grazie waved her hand and ran toward Wuming. But then, Grazie showed a dissatisfied look. Why won't Funbaba listen to me? Wuming couldn't help but laugh when he heard Grazie's question. In fact, Funbaba didn't make a move because of Wuming's order. Wuming wanted to see how determined the winner was. Although his body was trembling, he had the determination to face death. Since that was the case, carrying the lives of two people was what he should do now. Probably because he saw me coming. Wuming said perfunctorily. Wuming glanced at the crowd and didn't see Merlin. He couldn't help but ask Grazie. Where did Merlin go? Could it be that he died because of goddess Tiamat? Merlin said in the letter that he would be fine, but now that he couldn't see Merlin, Wuming thought that Merlin died. Mr. Merlin went to Eric Metropolis. He said that Ishtar, Quizzard, and Funbaba are here, so he didn't have to worry, so he went to Eric Metropolis alone. Although that was what she said, the worry between Grazie's eyebrows wasn't fake. Merlin was injured because of Tiamat before, and Ramu's figure was everywhere in the forest. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't worried. However, Merlin insisted on going. Grazie and the others couldn't persuade him, so they could only compromise. Merlin probably had his own thoughts. After all, it wasn't only the Tablet of Destiny that had prophecies. With this thought in mind, Wuming didn't continue the topic. By the way, we can't stay here anymore. We have to move these people to Uruk. Wuming pointed to the citizens who were hiding in the house behind him and didn't dare to come out. But Grazie and Matthew were puzzled. As long as Funbaba built the vine barrier, the Ramu would no longer be a problem. The sea level in the Persian Gulf is continuing to rise. I'm afraid this place will be submerged. If the citizens continue to stay here, it will undoubtedly be a dead end. Immediately afterward, Wuming looked at the Ramu group that was slaughtered by Funbaba, Ishtar, and Quizzard. Although it was a massacre, the Ramu group was still more difficult to deal with than the demonic beasts. These Ramu are not weak, and they can evolve. The vine barrier can only work for a short period of time. It can't work forever. These monsters were all made of God's clay. It couldn't be that simple. Hyunryong is right. I have already detected that the sea level in the Persian Gulf is rising. I'm afraid it won't be long before the entire southwest region is submerged. We have to move these people. Grazie and Matthew nodded. Since Wuming and Roman said so, they believed it. But we don't have a means of transportation, and Quizzard doesn't have many pterodactyls. There's no way to move so many citizens to Uruk. Grazie sighed. If Uruk was submerged, then Eric Metropolis would undoubtedly be submerged as well. The combined population of the two cities was already more than 1,000. It was really difficult to deal with. Indeed, whether it's the distance between Uruk and Uruk or the population of the two cities, it's quite unfavorable for this transfer. Roman in Chaldea kept typing on the keyboard, calculating various solutions. However, Leonardo da Vinci suddenly said, "Why don't we just leave it to the Villo?" Roman was stunned. Grazie and Matthew were stunned for a moment, then looked at Wuming. Wu-ming didn't know what to say. Since I'm the one who raised the problem, I'll naturally solve it. I'll use the portal to send all of them to Uruk. You don't have to worry. As expected, Assassin is the most reliable. Gadazi smiled. Speaking of which, who gave them the name Rama? Wu-ming suddenly asked. It's me, Dr. Roman said weakly. After all, Ramu was a mythical existence in Mesopotamia. Wu-ming, as a Hyunryong, was mysterious. Roman was afraid that this name had something to do with Wu-ming. However, because in this singularity, only the demon beast Rama did not appear in the 11 sons of Tiamat, Roman arbitrarily named these monsters Ramu. Don't be nervous, I'm just asking. Although it was just asking, Wu-ming was still quite concerned. In other words, it was impossible not to be concerned. Chapter 999. Back then, Wu-ming was called Ramu by Wu-ming. No matter how stupid he was, he should know that Hyunryong's identity had most likely become one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, which meant that Wu-ming was also considered Ramu, and these monsters were also called Ramu. It had to be said that having the same name as those monsters made Wu-ming feel quite disgusted. However, this was just a code name. After all, Wu-ming was not Rama. It was just a myth that was tampered with by later generations. In addition, Wu-ming gave all the divinity that belonged to Hyunryong to Ereshkigal, so Hyunryong identity could be said to be half-crippled. Therefore, Wu-ming shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. It's always convenient to have a code name. By the way, did you meet Kingu? Do you know where it is now? Just now, the fake Enkidu who claimed to be Kingu ambushed us when we rushed to the Persian Gulf to support Miss Ishtar. However, Miss Quizzard took advantage of the abnormality and defeated the other party. After that, we rushed over because we were worried about the situation in the jungle. In other words, they did not know. However, Wu-ming speculated that Kingu was most likely still in the Persian Gulf. With the abnormality and injury, as well as the appearance of Tiamat, it was impossible for Kingu to go anywhere else. Then, Wu-ming spoke to Roman in Chaldea. Roman, send me all the information about the enemy at this singularity. Wu-ming reached out and tapped on the communicator on Gadazi's wrist. Although it was a request, when Wu-ming touched the communicator, Chaldea's data was lost. Hey! Roman's panicked voice was heard. Roman was shocked. Wu-ming used an unknown method to hack into Chaldea through Gadazi's terminal and directly copied the information about the 7th singularity from Chaldea's database. What kind of magic can do this? Roman sighed gloomily. There was probably such magic, but Wu-ming did not know how to do it. Wu-ming actually asked Kalis to help him obtain information about Chaldea. After all, to Kalis, Chaldea's firewall system was extremely old-fashioned, and it was not a problem to hack into it. Kalis was indeed busy preparing Wu-ming's trump card, but that did not mean that Kalis was completely useless. Otherwise, Kalis would not have come to this singularity with Wu-ming. I'll open a portal between Uruk and Erech Metropolis to Uruk. I'll leave the task of guiding the citizens to you. We'll meet again in Uruk. After Wu-ming finished speaking, he leaped into the sky and released his magic power, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After Wu-ming left, a black-purple ripple appeared in front of Matthew and Gadazi. This was probably the portal that connected to Uruk. Perhaps, such a portal had also appeared in Erech Metropolis. Senior, is Senior Villo okay? Matthew was a little worried. However, it was not Gadazi who answered Matthew. Don't worry. He's a god that even I have a new level of respect for. Besides, he's just going to investigate. He won't directly attack Tiamat. Nothing will happen. The Quetzalcoatl, who ran to Matthew's side, comforted Matthew. Then she whistled, and a huge gray pterosaur flew in front of Quizzard. You guys go to Erech Metropolis to help guide the citizens. Leave this to me. Quizzard, who was listening to everyone's conversation, asked Funbaba and Ishtar to temporarily block Ramo while she sent Gadazi and the others to transport. Please, Quizzard. Please, Miss Quizzard. Gadazi and Matthew asked one by one. Yes, leave it to me. Then, let's meet in Uruk. The Quetzalcoatl waved at Gadazi and Matthew as if it was an order. The Quetzalcoatl under them suddenly spread its wings and flew toward Eric Metropolis. Then, Quizzard arranged for the citizens of Uruk to enter the portal one by one. Whether it was for survival or for Quizzard's dignity, they had to enter the portal. Because of this, in just a short period of time, the citizens of UR City had all entered the teleportation portal. Quizzard, come and help. At this time, Ishtar's exasperated voice was heard. The Rama could no longer hold them back. Even if Funbaba kept summoning vines to intercept, they still could not stop the Rama's numbers. Rats could indeed bite an elephant to death, especially one that did not fight. Funbaba and Ishtar were such elephants at this moment. Ishtar had to cherish her magic, so she could only kill the Rama bit by bit. The task of stopping the Ramu was actually handed over to Funbaba. After all, it was more suitable for the task. Although Funbaba could kill the Ramu, its main task now was to stop the Ramu and allow the citizens of Uruk to leave. It had to be said that it was already a good thing that they could hold on until now. The number of Ramu that came to support them was probably in the tens of thousands, and this did not include the dead Ramu. Moreover, one should not forget that the Ramu had always had reinforcements. With Ishtar and Funbaba not fighting, and Ramu continuously providing reinforcements, the number of Ramu could only increase, not decrease. However, now was probably the time to reap the harvest. After all, the citizens of Uruk had all been evacuated. Ishtar, you can go all out now. Funbaba too, the feathered serpent goddess, waved at the human and beast in the sky and on the ground. Then, Quizzard whistled again. A colorful long-haired pterosaur flew over. This was Quizzard's personal mount. When the pterosaur flew over Quizzard's head, Quizzard suddenly jumped and landed on the pterosaur's back. She kept increasing the pterosaur's altitude, as if something was about to reach the ground. Quizzard's method was not wrong. Something was about to reach the ground, and that was the anger that Ishtar and Funbaba had been holding in for so long. Woo woo woo. Accompanied by Funbaba's cry, an earthquake-like tremor spread from Funbaba's feet to the surroundings. The Ramu were all shaken to the ground, and even the buildings in Uruk began to collapse and crack. However, this was just the appetizer. Quizzard, who was flying in the sky, had an exceptionally good vision. In her eyes, almost all the Ramu were instantly pierced by the mutated vegetation around them. Some weak vegetation that could not kill the Ramu even left seeds in the Ramu's body. In the next second, the sprouts in the Ramu's body suddenly grew and directly broke the Ramu's body. Not only that, but the aftermath of the earthquake had also arrived. Countless cracks appeared on the ground, and countless Ramu fell into the cracks as if they had fallen into a bottomless abyss, disappearing without a trace. Chapter 1000. Woo woo woo. Funbaba roared a few more times, and the cracked ground suddenly healed. There were no traces of cracks at all, and even the vegetation on the ground was intact. The buildings in UR City were restored to their original state, and some were even decorated with vines and flowers. It looked like a good place to live. Funbaba was a mythical beast that was even more powerful than the sky Bulgujulan. It could easily change the terrain with just a wave of its hand. Moreover, Funbaba could even restore the changed terrain to its original state. This highlighted how powerful Funbaba was. The Ramu who were at the back of the forest were at a loss. How did the enemy suddenly become so powerful? Wouldn't it consume a lot of magic to change the terrain like this? Wasn't there enough magic? However, Funbaba didn't lack magic at all, and it didn't consume much magic to control the mutation of the plants and the cracking of the earth. These could be said to be its innate ability. It had the powerful ability to change the terrain with just a wave of its hand. Even if the area was so large, it still didn't consume much of its magic. I underestimated Funbaba, Quizzard said thoughtfully. While Quizzard was thinking, the attack on Rama didn't end. Then, a golden star suddenly shone in the sky. In the next second, the golden star landed on the Ramu who weren't affected by the attack. In an instant, the whole ground shook again, and the light covered everything. Quizzard quickly ordered the pterosaur to close its eyes and turn around. Otherwise, its eyes would be directly blinded by the light. After a moment, when the dazzling light dissipated, What was left was a bare and sunken ground. As for the Ramu, there was no doubt that there wasn't even a trace of it left behind. That guy is too messy. Quizzard couldn't help but frown. Funbaba's attack wouldn't affect its body much, but Ishtar probably couldn't. The attack just now might have consumed all the magic in her body. As expected by Quizzard, Ishtar landed on the ground of Ur City. It seemed that she had used up a lot of her magic. In fact, Ishtar wasn't like Funbaba. The attack just now directly used up all the magic in her body. Ishtar was right. Ishtar, are you okay? Quizzard landed on the ground and came before Ishtar. He could not help but reprimand him. You're too reckless. Hyunryong can't replenish your magic now. I accidentally used too much magic. Ishtar laughed. She was obviously acting dumb. However, Ishtar had Wuming's support after all. Even if Wuming's 3 magic crystals were used up and he couldn't replenish Ishtar's magic quickly, with the contract between Ishtar and Wuming, Ishtar could recover quickly. Moreover, don't forget who Ishtar was. She was the extremely capricious mistress of the heavens. Even if releasing such a terrifying attack would lead to insufficient magic, according to Ishtar's character, she had to release it. Ishtar wanted to release the resentment that she had been holding in for a long time. If she were to be timid because of the lack of magic, it would not be like Ishtar. Quizzard also understood Ishtar's temper. In addition, Ishtar and Wuming's contract could indeed help Ishtar recover her magic quickly. In the end, she didn't say anything. In short, Ishtar was not in a dangerous situation at the moment. They could immediately use the portal that Wuming left behind to go to Uruk. It would be very safe in Uruk. Let's go. Let's go to Uruk. Hyunryong's portal is still intact. It did not disappear because of the attack just now. In fact, after Funbaba and Ishtar released the attack, Quizzard had already planned to fly to Eridu with the pterosaur, or directly to Uruk. However, when she landed just now, she found that the portal left behind by Wuming was not affected, which saved her a lot of effort. However, at this time, Funbaba suddenly ran over and was ready to go to Uruk to wait for Wuming. However, Quizzard suddenly found a problem. That was, the portal left by Wuming was not big, and Funbaba was too big, so Funbaba could not enter the portal at all. Quizzard and Ishtar looked at each other, not knowing what to do. They couldn't leave Funbaba alone, not to mention other things. Wuming would definitely be angry. So, let Funbaba run to Uruk? It was a little cruel, woo-woo. Probably seeing the doubts of the two, Funbaba whimpered twice, and then its body emitted light. The light covered Funbaba, and Funbaba's body was gradually shrinking. It turns out that Funbaba can shrink. Ishtar breathed a sigh of relief. However, when Funbaba shrank, Quizzard and Ishtar, who saw the scene in front of them, were not calm. In front of them, a young girl with green eyes and long green hair appeared. On Wuming's side, on the way to the Persian Gulf, Wuming digested the information he got from Chaldea. Wuming really didn't know much about Tiamat, and this was the main reason why Wuming needed information. After confirming that Ur City and Eric Metropolis were safe, Wuming also had time to go to the Persian Gulf to find out what Wuming was most worried about: the relationship between Tiamat and the root black mud. Wuming looked down, and what he saw was black seawater, which was full of the root black mud's aura. This completely proved that Tiamat had the root black mud, and there was no need to investigate further. However, Wuming still had to go and find other information. Moreover, Wuming still had to find Kingu. After all, the Holy Grail that Wuming asked Kingu to keep on his behalf was still missing. There was still a person in it, and he had to find it as soon as possible. As for whether Kingu would give it to him, that was another matter. I don't know how Tachika and the others are doing. One had to know that the area below Wu Ming was supposed to be land, but it had turned into an ocean. There was no doubt that the sea level was rising. It was just that the rate of sea level rise is a bit faster than I expected. After all, even if the sea changed into mulberry fields, there was still a process. Who would have thought that after a while, the land near the Persian Gulf would be submerged? Wuming shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He raised his arm. Shaoan, can you try to find Kingu's location? Not to mention that it was Enkidu's body, Enkidu and Kingu were both heavenly locks, so they should be able to sense it. Sure enough, chains appeared on Wu Ming's arm and pointed in a certain direction. It seemed that Kingu was there. Wu Ming's magical power erupted again, and with the help of his telekinesis, he flew out. Chapter 1001. On a tall mountain in the southeast. At this moment, due to the rising sea level, the Persian Gulf had almost completely submerged the southwest part of Mesopotamia. The only land was probably this tall mountain. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to be moving with the sea level. The sky here was already covered in dark clouds. And on the peak of this tall mountain, the white-clothed green-haired puppet stood at a place with an excellent view, looking at the Persian Gulf in the distance. However, its unfocused gaze showed that it was absent-minded at the moment. This person was the one who used Enkidu's body, the one who called himself Kingu. "My mission is over," Kingu muttered to himself. It was probably because of Tiamat's awakening that Kingu had the time to think about his own matters on this mountain peak. And the constant headache from before was something that Kingu had been thinking about. He thought about why he could not face the Uruk Hyunryong, why he would have a headache, and why he would see some memories that did not belong to him. It's just a remnant effect of this body. Kingu often used this sentence to numb himself. But Kingu knew that it could only numb himself temporarily, but not forever. Kingu had to admit that he was completely affected. Because of this, Kingu lured Wu Ming to the underworld and abandoned Gorgon. His goal was to wake Tiamat up as soon as possible. Only when Goddess Tiamat awakens would he be able to relax. As long as he could make Goddess Tiamat awaken before Wu Ming's influence caused his entire body to change, he would be able to complete the only mission he had in his memories. Kingu suddenly looked at a certain direction in the sky. A figure was flying in his direction. Without a doubt, it was Wu Ming who used Enkidu's senses to find Kingu. Celestial locks could sense each other. Kingu had already noticed this when Wu Ming brought Enkidu's celestial lock. Kingu's body was a genuine celestial lock in this era. It was much clearer than Enkidu's magical noble phantasm that wrapped around Wu Ming's arm. Therefore, after knowing that Wu Ming was coming, Kingu basically avoided Wu Ming. To be safe, Kingu didn't even come into contact with Uruk servants. Even if there was a chance to kill Chaldea's master, Kingu gave up many opportunities to avoid being deeply influenced by Wu Ming again. Although Kingu met Wu Ming in the end, it couldn't resist Wu Ming. When Gorgon lost its self-control and was influenced by Tiamat to attack the North Wall, Kingu had been holding back. Even if it didn't want to meet Wu Ming, it waited until Wu Ming threw a great sun at him. But after it made a move, it immediately slipped away because it was influenced by this body again. As a result, it almost made Gorgon misunderstand that it was rebelling. However, it was precisely because of Gorgon's misunderstanding that Kingu had the idea of rebelling. It wanted Gorgon to use death to wake up Tiamat at this moment. This was Kingu's idea at that time. Although Kingu also wanted Gorgon to fulfill his wish of destroying all the humans in Mesopotamia, Kingu was worried that it would become a variable in the long run. But unfortunately, the nightmare that dragged Tiamat into the dream had already discovered the clues and did not let it leave when Tiamat woke up. Kingu was naturally referring to Merlin. But it didn't matter anymore. Mother was awake anyway, and it was no longer needed. Kingu looked at the Persian Gulf and turned to look at Wu Ming's increasingly clear figure. Now, it only had to solve the problem caused by this body, even if the end result was death. Kingu was abnormal at this moment. Its purple eyes calmly looked at Wu Ming, who was floating in the air parallel to it. And when Wu Ming saw that Kingu did not escape, he wanted to have a chat with Kingu. "Should I call you Kingu, or should I call you Enkidu's successor?" Wu Ming was the first to speak. "Name doesn't matter." Kingu answered Wu Ming calmly. It looked like it had given up everything to fight Wu Ming in the final battle. But Wu Ming could see something from this sentence. Kingu admitted that it was not Tiamat's son, Kingu. It was just a name given to it. Similarly, Kingu also realized that it was a consciousness produced by Enkidu's body. In other words, it was Enkidu's successor. "I can see that your nature is not bad. Why do you stand on the opposite side of humans?" "Of course it is because this is Mother's wish." Kingu answered Wu Ming's question without hesitation. I am Mother's son who loves Mother. I am a puppet loyal to Tiamat. I am also another consciousness produced by Enkidu's body. Helping Mother fulfill her wish is my everything. Kingu's voice suddenly became louder. Kingu admitted everything. It was a fake Enkidu who used the name Kingu. It was a puppet controlled by Tiamat. It had no memories, no friends, no family. It was a pitiful weapon, tool, that could not even be considered a living being. The real Kingu had a mother and friends. He stood on his mother's side and died for her. God Kingu died a worthy death without regrets. Enkidu also had Gilgamesh, a close friend, and Wuming, a person he believed in and served. His friend, Gilgamesh, treated him as his only friend and would always remember him. The god he believed in brought him to his side. Enkidu died without regrets. As for Kingu, it was just a double imposter who used the name Kingu and Enkidu's body. It had nothing. Even the memories that appeared in its mind because of Wuming were not Kingu's, but Enkidu's. All it had was a little bit of jealousy and envy. Even its long-awaited new human brothers were disgusting creatures. It was only because they were Mother's son that Kingu didn't say anything. However, it still didn't want to stay with those creatures. Moreover, even Kingu's mother, Tiamat, didn't need it anymore. This was because Kingu had given his heart, the holy grail that disturbed the singularity, to Tiamat. Firstly, it was to increase Tiamat's power. Secondly, it was to return everything to Tiamat so that she could deal with her own affairs. However, after giving the holy grail to Tiamat, Kingu could no longer hear his mother's voice. It was as if Tiamat had unilaterally cut off the connection. That's right. It was as if a tool had lost its value and would naturally be discarded. Now it had nothing. Chapter 1002. Now it had lost everything. Therefore, after Tiamat abandoned, it chose to accept all the memories and influence brought about by Enkidu's body. It was also because of this that it no longer had a headache when facing Wuming. Hee. At this moment, Kingu actually smiled at Wuming. Coupled with that familiar face, Wuming could not help but feel that Enkidu was smiling at him. Then Kingu said something that shocked him. Lord Wuming, you came to me to ask for the Holy Grail, right? Kingu knew Wuming's name. How could Wuming not be shocked? Uruk Hyunryong's real name had always been a mystery in Sumer mythology. Only Gilgamesh and Enkidu knew Wuming's real name. Even the Sumer's god and Gilgamesh's father, Lugarbanda, who made a deal with Wuming, did not know. From this, it seemed that Kingu had really accepted the memories brought about by Enkidu's body. Although he did not know if it was all or part of the memories, Wuming knew that it was no longer just Kingu, but a Kingu mixed with Enkidu's memories. It was no longer just Kingu. Then, without waiting for Wuming to recover from his shock, Kingu spoke again. The Magic King's Holy Grail is my heart. I have already returned the Holy Grail to Mother. The heart was given to someone else, but Kingu was still alive. There was no doubt that it had found a replacement for the heart. It was obvious that it was the Holy Grail that Wuming had asked Kingu to protect before leaving. Wuming couldn't help but frown. Wuming could not possibly dig out Kingu's heart, could he? Besides, Kingu already had Enkidu's memories, so it could be considered half an Enkidu or a successor to Enkidu. Furthermore, it seemed like Kingu did not intend to become enemies with Wuming anymore. Wuming could not dig out its heart no matter what. Since that's the case, I'll leave the Holy Grail with you for now. I'll take it out when I find something to replace your heart. Then, Wuming waved his hand, and Enkidu's heavenly lock flew towards Kingu. But just to be safe, I can't let you act alone. Who knew what Kingu would do next? Tiamat was its mother, and it had become its obsession. If something bad happened, Wuming would have no one to cry to, so it was better to keep it by its side. Even to an imposter like me, you're still as gentle as ever, Sir Wuming. Kingu smiled, but its heart was in pain. The nicer Wuming was to it, the more upset it felt. Just as the heavenly lock was about to touch Kingu, Kingu suddenly raised its hand and condensed magical power into a hand knife, as if it was resisting. This was within Wuming's expectations. However, in the next second, Kingu's action made Wuming's pupils dilate. Poochie! Kingu stabbed its hand knife into its own chest, and blood splattered everywhere. Sir, although I don't have the right to say this, but you and my mother are my everything. I've already repaid what I owe to my mother. Now, it's time for me to return to you what I owe you. In the next second, Kingu dug out its heart. Along with the scarlet blood, a pure golden holy grail appeared in Kingu's hand. Then, Kingu used the last of its strength to throw the holy grail in Wuming's direction. I'm very ashamed of my previous interference. This body is Enkidu's body, not mine, but I can only atone for my sins with my death. After Kingu finished speaking, it collapsed on the ground and did not move at all. Only the blood that flowed out of its heart stained the ground around it. In the end, Jingu's purple eyes, which seemed to be satisfied, slowly closed. Wuming subconsciously used the Holy Grail to look at Kingu lying in a pool of blood without saying anything. He just looked at it quietly. Kingu had already decided to die. Although it could still be saved, Wuming did not have the right to interfere, because that was the choice made by the consciousness of Enkidu's body. Wuming respected Enkidu. It's probably because your memories have affected it too deeply, Wuming said to Enkidu's heavenly lock as if they were chatting. Heavenly lock, which had already returned to Wuming's side, wrapped around Wuming's body and rubbed Wuming's face to show its approval. Enkidu himself knew how heavy his feelings for Wuming were. To Enkidu, Wuming was like a father, a lover, a teacher, and a god that he believed in from the bottom of his heart. After Enkidu was cursed to death by the gods, his soul also willingly left with Wuming and became Wuming's noble artifact. From this, it could be seen how heavy Enkidu's feelings for Wuming were. Through the restraining force, this emotion had become something shared by every parallel world's Enkidu, and the Enkidu of this singularity was no exception. The heavy feelings turned into memories and stayed in Enkidu's body for a long time after his death. Wuming was the primer that opened up these memories. After Kingu saw Wuming, the memories that had been gathered in his body for a long time surged into his heart and turned into feelings. They fought with his thoughts of Tiamat, causing Kingu to have a headache. However, Kingu was just another consciousness that was born in Enkidu's body. How could a piece of white paper that was only stained with a little red resist the assimilation of a piece of paper that was stained with different colors? It was only a matter of time before Kingu was occupied by Enkidu's memories. It was because of this that Kingu chose to kill Gorgon and awaken Tiamat. This was to prevent him from changing after accepting Enkidu's memories. As it turned out, Kingu had indeed undergone an unprecedented change. If one had to describe it, the current Kingu was very similar to the Ishtar in this singularity. The Ishtar in this singularity was a new personality that merged with the goddess of the gods, Inanna, and the modern human girl, Rin and Osaka. It was just that the personality of a god was the main part, and the personality of a human was the secondary part. But even so, this was still a new personality that was different from the gods Inanna and the human Rin and Osaka's new personality. The current Kingu was a new personality that merged with Enkidu's memories, and the consciousness of Kingu formed in this singularity. The new personality not only had love for Tiamat, but also had feelings for Wuming. Because Enkidu's memories had a huge impact on Kingu, the new personality's feelings for Wuming took up most of the time, and its love for Tiamat took up a small part. Furthermore, Kingu thought that Tiamat had unilaterally given up on him, so the only thing left in his mind was his feelings for Wuming, or rather his guilt. Chapter 1003. It was probably because of his feelings for Wuming that the new personality Kingu thought that he had committed a grave mistake and died out of shame. In the end, Kingu dug out his own heart and gave it back to Wuming. Kingu's nature isn't bad, he was just used by someone else. Wuming's tone carried a hint of anger when he thought of this. Kingu was still a consciousness born from Enkidu's body. For Enkidu, who had already gained intelligence and was known as a pure person, even if it was a body left behind after death, the consciousness born from it wouldn't be too bad. At most, it would just lack some compassion. In a situation like Kingu's, unless someone deliberately guided him. This was what made Wuming angry. Someone used Enkidu's body to create a new personality. This person must be Gidia. Enkidu was Enkidu. Even if it was a different consciousness, it was still a consciousness born from Enkidu. It wasn't something that anyone could touch. Wu-Ming believed that if Gilgamesh knew about this, he would be just as angry as Wu-Ming, or even more angry. Gilgamesh's only close friend had been used. Just this point alone was enough to make him furious. Even though Gilgamesh didn't react much when he found out about Enkidu's impersonation, that was only the self-cultivation of a wise king. If Gilgamesh had the opportunity to deal with Gidia, Gilgamesh would definitely let him have a taste of the oldest king's anger. Of course, Wu-Ming was the same. Wu-Ming looked at the circle of light floating in the sky and said quietly, "Gidia, you're dead." Wu-Ming had decided that if he didn't turn Gidia into ashes, he would read his name backwards. Just as Wu-Ming was furious, Enkidu's heavenly lock seemed to have made a decision and acted on its own. Walala, like a golden snake, the heavenly lock slowly approached Kingu's body, which was about to turn cold, and stabbed into the gap in Kingu's heart. Shao-En. Wu-Ming could feel that Enkidu was gradually leaving him. It didn't matter whether he left or not. After all, Wu-Ming didn't treat Enkidu as his noble phantasm. She had her own thoughts and Wu-Ming had no right to stop her. However, Wu-Ming couldn't understand what was happening. The heavenly lock that was wrapped around Wu-Ming's body completely left Wu-Ming's body and slowly entered Kingu's heart through the gap. The gap in Kingu's heart was like a bottomless pit. Enkidu's heavenly lock was only left with a tail that hadn't been filled yet. Finally, the heavenly lock completely entered Kingu's body. In the next second, a silver light with a hint of gold shone from Kingu's body. Then, the gap in Kingu's heart disappeared and the blood on his body disappeared. Even the pool of blood on the ground disappeared. Jin Gu, on the other hand, stood up and looked at Wu-Ming with a smile. "Master Hyunryong." This gave Wu-Ming an unprecedented surprise. At this moment, the person in front of him wasn't Kingu, but the real Enkidu. Enkidu and Kingu both knew his real name. However, probably because Enkidu was Wu-Ming's chief priest, she preferred to call Wu-Ming Master Hyunryong. This was the tacit understanding between Wu-Ming and Enkidu. Moreover, this was undoubtedly Enkidu's smile, so the person in front of him was definitely Enkidu. "You fused with Kingu's body?" However, after asking this question, Wu-Ming wanted to slap himself. This was clearly Enkidu's body, and Kingu was just another consciousness born from this body. How could he say that he had fused with Kingu? It should be Enkidu who had returned to his body. In other words, the heaven lock, Enkidu, had returned. Seeing Wu-Ming's embarrassment, Enkidu smiled and nodded. "I've accepted Kingu, so you can say that I've fused with Kingu." Looking at Enkidu's eyes, Wu-Ming noticed that the pair of golden eyes, Enkidu's golden eyes in the game, flashed with a hint of purple. It seemed that the two of them had really fused. "It won't be a problem for you, right?" Wu-Ming was a bit worried. After all, Kingu was determined to die, so Wu-Ming was worried that Enkidu would be affected. However, Enkidu shook his head. "Even if it's not for the next plan, I won't seek death for you anymore." After Enkidu said this, Wu-Ming understood that Kingu and Enkidu had indeed fused together. After all, Enkidu's "I" referred to both her and Kingu. Then, Wu-Ming sighed. "Is this really okay?" If Enkidu insisted on saving Kingu, Wu-Ming had other ways. For example, he could immediately use the teleportation portal to find Gilgamesh in Uruk. The Holy Grail in Gilgamesh's treasury could be used as a replacement. There was no need for Enkidu and Kingu to fuse at all. "That's good." Enkidu smiled and nodded. "It's the consciousness of this body that wants to die. Since that's the case, let me, who is also the consciousness of this body, make the change." Kingu was determined to die. Since that was the case, Enkidu and Kingu would fuse together and directly dispel Kingu's suicidal thoughts. After all, no matter how much Kingu wanted to die, he had to be careful. This body no longer belonged to Kingu alone, but also to Enkidu. If he dragged Enkidu to die with him, it would go against Wu-Ming's intentions. It was already treacherous enough, so it could not make any more mistakes. Therefore, Kingu dispelled the idea of suicide. Moreover, Kingu is the consciousness of my body after all. He can totally be me. Since that's the case, there's nothing wrong with fusing with me. Needless to say, Enkidu was the most open-minded. After all, they were the consciousness of the same body. Moreover, Kingu was indeed a pitiful person. Enkidu was willing to fuse with Kingu. Not only could he save Kingu, but he could also obtain a body. It was killing two birds with one stone. Enkidu had no reason to reject. Since it's your decision, I won't say anything else. Since it was something Enkidu wanted to do, Wuming would let it go and agree. Again, Enkidu was not Wuming's tool or relic. She was Enkidu. In Wuming's eyes, Enkidu was not only a complete body, but also a perfect person with a perfect personality and mentality. Although Leonardo da Vinci would be dissatisfied if he heard this, Wuming thought so. However, what Enkidu said next made Wuming's impression of Enkidu as a perfect person crumble. It's just that this body doesn't have a chest, so I'm not used to it. Chapter 1004. After saying that, Enkidu subconsciously touched his chest. It was flat. At the same time, a hint of regret appeared on Enkidu's face. Wuming did not know what to say. Indeed, when Enkidu was by Wuming's side, he was influenced by Wuming and evolved into a girl's body. Enkidu also gradually got used to being a girl. However, Enkidu in other parallel worlds were all genderless clay figurines, including this particular Enkidu. This body had already been fixed and could not be changed. If he wanted to change it, Wuming might be able to do it if he went back to his roots. Asterisk cough cough. Asterisk little Enkidu. Wuming looked at Enkidu, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He almost got dragged into this mess by Enkidu. Enkidu saw Wuming's embarrassed expression and smiled again. The angelic aura of a girl appeared. It's fine, Lord Hyunryong. I can get used to this body. You don't have to worry about me. However, Wuming was not worried. He just did not know what to say. However, Enkidu was giving Wuming a way out. Wuming would not refuse. However, Wuming inexplicably felt that Enki had the potential to be a black-bellied person. He looked at Enkidu again. Just as Enkidu said, he could get used to it quickly. However, it was not Enkidu who got used to the body. Instead, it was the body that got used to Enkidu's aura. Enkidu had always been by Wuming's side. He already had a hint of a girl's aura. After fusing with Enkidu, this genderless clay figurine also produced a hint of a girl's aura. Did this mean that the body was getting used to Enkidu? Perhaps Gilgamesh would be stunned if he saw Enkidu like this. Wuming could not help but think. While Wuming was imagining Gilgamesh's expression, Enkidu, who had come to Wuming's side, spoke. Lord Hyunryong, regarding Mother, I have some countermeasures. A hint of seriousness appeared on Enki's face. Upon hearing this, Wuming's eyes narrowed. Just as Enkidu had said, she definitely had a way to deal with Tiamat. After all, Kingu's consciousness also existed in this body. It was just that it had merged with Enkidu. Kingu was the one who possessed the Holy Grail and was the main culprit behind the chaos. It could be said that he was the one who understood Tiamat the most. Mother is a perfect being who was born without death. As the mother goddess of life, as long as there is life on the surface, she will not have the concept of death. Wuming nodded. He was very clear on this point. God Tiamat was killed, and her body was used to create heaven and earth. This was only in name. Perhaps the gods wanted to erase the fact that God Tiamat was still alive, so they said that. Unfortunately, no matter how much the future humans believed that Tiamat was dead and separated into heaven and earth, Tiamat was still alive and well. This was because as long as there was life on the surface, just this point alone was sufficient to prove that Tiamat was still alive. This was a fundamental problem and could not be affected by the later generation's fabrications. Moreover, Magician was able to discover the truth behind Tiamat's unkillable existence. At the very least, Wuming had obtained information about Tiamat from Chaldea's database. This was also one of the reasons why he supported Tiamat's survival. And the gods would not destroy all life on the surface just to kill Tiamat. Not to mention other things, she was still their mother. Because Tiamat could not be killed, the gods, who were helpless, chose to seal Tiamat and banish her to the void dimension. When Wuming entered the mirror world to retrieve his class card, he had to pass through the void dimension. It was a world with nothing, not even heaven and earth. There was only busy darkness. And Tiamat had been in there for who knew how many years. Perhaps tens of thousands of years, perhaps hundreds of millions of years, or perhaps it was an age that Wuming could not understand. After all, who knew how long these gods had lived? If we want to destroy Mother, we need the help of someone who has mastered the ultimate of death. Although Enkidu's words were provocative, Wuming did not have the time to complain. Instead, Wuming's eyes lit up. Isn't this referring to the first Hassan? Seeing Wuming's eyes light up, Enkidu smiled and nodded. That's right, it's that old man. Enkidu had never seen the first Hassan before, but she could tell from Wuming's words when he examined Uxiumyugul. There's one more thing, Lord Wuming. If we can lure Mother to the underworld, our chances of success will be greater. Enkidu was hesitant when she said this. This was something that could not be helped. After all, it was extremely difficult to lure Tiamat to the underworld. Not to mention that the underworld had always been far away in the north because of the Stone Soldier 8 formations. Tiamat was not a fool. She would not enter that place so easily. Enkidu stopped talking, and Wuming fell into deep thought. Wuming was not thinking about anything else, but whether this plan would work. If it was just Tiamat alone, this plan would definitely work. Moreover, even without Wuming, the remaining people would be able to solve this crisis. Wuming suspected that the first Hassan from the previous singularity had given him face because he knew that this singularity needed him. If it was a coincidence, it would be too much of a coincidence. Wuming did not believe in fate, because Wuming himself was an existence that could disrupt fate. However, the premise was that Tiamat was still the original Tiamat. On the contrary, Tiamat somehow obtained the black origin soil. Even Wuming himself did not know what that thing was. He only knew that it was something that belonged to the origin, and it was a natural enemy of Wuming. Wuming was worried that Tiamat would change because of the black origin soil. No, it would definitely change. Aziz Dakaha in the box court world had undergone a huge change after being possessed by the black origin soil. Whether it was his body or his abilities, they were all different. Tiamat might change as well. Wuming took 2 steps toward the cliff next to him. He looked at the dark Persian Gulf, and then at the dense forest. The sea level had already risen above the dense forest. No, rather than saying that the sea level was rising, it was more like the black origin soil that filled the entire ocean was slowly submerging the land. As the black origin soil continued to spread, the dark clouds in the sky also moved little by little, as if reflecting the arrival of the apocalypse. Wuming turned around and looked at Enkidu. Anyway, let's go back to Uruk first. Mesopotamia, the central city of the Sumer dynasty. The originally lively Uruk was now quite crowded, not only because the citizens of Uruk and Erech Metropolis had come to Uruk, but also because of the people resurrected by Ereshkigal and the soldiers on the North Wall. That's right, the people on the North Wall had returned. Chapter 1005. Yes, the people of the North Wall had returned. This was the order issued by Gilgamesh to return to the capital. The magical beasts that attacked the North Wall were killed by the Dinger. After the calculation, nearly half of the treasures in Gilgamesh's treasury were consumed. The semi-disabled commander Musamuf was also killed by the Dinger that was modified by Zhuge Kong Ming. After Gilgamesh received the news that the magical beasts in the North Wall had been annihilated, he ordered the supreme commander of the North Wall, Leonidas I, to lead the soldiers back to the Uruk. Gorgon had summoned all the magical beasts that were located in the North Wall. It was impossible for the magical beasts to exist in the north. Even the magical beast's nest was impossible. Gilgamesh was worried that the Kuru and the Ramu that Chaldea had named would attack humans in other places because they couldn't enter the Uruk. So he ordered the people of the North Wall to immediately return to the Uruk. In the land of Mesopotamia, only the southern jungle, the Uruk city and the North Wall were confirmed to have humans. The southern jungle and the Uruk were protected. Only the North Wall couldn't protect the flying Kuru. Zhuge Kong Ming agreed with King Gilgamesh's order after hearing the news. He immediately discussed with Leonidas I to lead the soldiers back to the Uruk. It was worth mentioning that the return route was underground. Although the acceleration ability of the underground passage couldn't support so many people, but it was a hidden underground passage. The underground passage was protected by the stone soldiers. The magical beasts couldn't detect it and couldn't enter. It was very safe. Although not all the soldiers of the North Wall had arrived in the Uruk, but most of them had entered the underground passage. It was only a matter of time. At this moment, it could be said that almost all the human cities of this era had gathered in the Uruk. However, because of this, the Uruk was completely overcrowded. Siduri, who had followed the citizens of Eric Metropolis back to the Uruk, ordered the soldiers to speed up the construction of temporary residences for everyone and every family. At the same time, she was worried about the supplies. The various utensils were still manageable, but the main problem was that there was not enough food. Currently, the periphery of the Uruk was filled with those strange magical beasts. Only the Uruk, which had been transformed into a fortress city, was safe. However, there was not much food in the city. According to Siduri's calculations, it was only enough for the entire city's citizens to eat for 3 to 4 days, and this was under the condition that they had to scrimp and save. The real time might be even shorter than this. Fortunately, the people gathered in Uruk did not complain, especially when they saw the dark clouds drifting over from the Persian Gulf. Or rather, the dark red ominous clouds. The citizens became even more united. The elderly were supported by the young people when they walked. People gave way to each other when they ate. There were also many people who invited people who didn't have a place to live to stay in their homes. In short, it was a scene of unity where everyone helped each other. Every time Siduri saw this scene, she would have a thought. This was probably the reason why the Uruk could last for half a year under the attack of the magical beasts. Siduri's adjutant, who was assisting her, would occasionally be stunned by the smile that came from Siduri's thought. The thin veil couldn't hide this overly sacred smile at all. But after this thought, Siduri's heart was filled with deep worry. After seeing the good side of people, she really didn't want to see the evil side of people. Siduri knew that now, everyone was living well. If 7 days later, when there was a lack of food, the evil in people's hearts would probably be drawn out. If an example had to be given, it would be like the 2 citizens of Uruk who were challenged by Ramu to a one-on-one duel. Both of them would try their best to kill each other for a slim chance of survival. This was also something that couldn't be helped. I hope that King Gilgamesh and Lord Hyunryong can solve this crisis as soon as possible. Looking at the direction of the God Tower, Siduri prayed. That's right, this was the reason why Gilgamesh didn't appear at this critical moment. He was in the God Tower discussing with Chaldea and the others. At the top of the Uruk God Tower, between the thrones. All the soldiers in the room had disappeared because they were all sent out by Gilgamesh to support Siduri's work. Only Gilgamesh and Chaldea's group, the gods that Wuming pulled into the group, and a little girl who looked like a young version of Enkidu running around with Fufu between the thrones were left in the room. This little girl was Funbaba, who returned to Uruk with Quizzard and Ishtar. Although everyone, including Gilgamesh, was surprised, the most important thing now was to discuss Tiamat. The issue of Funbaba was put at the back. At this moment, everyone was standing in the middle of the thrones, surrounding a virtual projection. A moving living factory, magic power enough to launch interstellar travel, a huge life source stored in the body, the god's arc that humans will need hundreds of years to realize. Roman's voice was heard from the projection. This is Tiamat's true face. As his voice fell, Gadazi and the others showed a melancholy expression. However, Gilgamesh did not buy it. You bastard! Are you on Tiamat's side? Why isn't there a strategy or 2 on it? Gilgamesh came to the front of the virtual projection with a slightly ferocious expression and yelled at Roman in Chaldea. Let me finish. Roman also had a rare temper. He actually stood up from his seat and retorted at Gilgamesh. It's Marduk's hand axe, right? At this moment, Merlin, who was at the side, spoke. Merlin's injuries because of Tiamat had almost recovered. Moreover, because he no longer needed to use magic power to put Tiamat into a deep sleep, Merlin had become a rare combatant, whether it was using the staff in his hand or a weapon like a sword. That's right, it's Marduk's hand axe. Roman nodded and sat down again. The god Marduk is the existence that killed Tiamat in the myths. His hand axe should be able to cause damage to Tiamat. This sentence came from Leonardo da Vinci, who was next to Roman in Chaldea. However, he only said, can cause damage, and did not say, can kill Tiamat. This meant that Leonardo da Vinci did not dare to jump to the conclusion that Marduk's hand axe could kill Tiamat. After all, although the myths said that Tiamat was killed, the facts proved that Tiamat was not dead at all. Otherwise, she would not have come out to wreak havoc in Mesopotamia. Therefore, it was uncertain whether Marduk's hand axe would be effective. Chapter 1006. And there was an extremely important point. Because Tiamat's authority came to Erech Metropolis along with the sea level, we couldn't take Marduk's hand axe with us, Quizzard interjected. Even if we wanted to use it now, we couldn't. Quizzard interjected with a serious expression. At this moment, the rising sea level had already submerged nearly half of Mesopotamia's land. If it wasn't for the Nabiston's tooth that Gilgamesh and Zhuge Kong Ming developed together, the rising sea level would have already reached the Uruk. Everyone present had already discussed the rising sea level earlier. The spreading Black Sea was Tiamat's authority. There was no need to confirm this point. It was completely obvious. What should we do now? Our only hope of a weapon has sunk into the Black Sea. Gadotsi was slightly unwilling to give up. Gadotsi was told by everyone that she couldn't touch the sea level, or she would become Tiamat's person. Although she had never seen what a person who became Tiamat looked like, Gadotsi inexplicably didn't want to see that scene. At this moment, a voice that didn't belong to anyone present sounded. I can probably take it out. However, Gadotsi immediately recognized the owner of this voice. Assassin. As expected, everyone looked at the source of the voice. Wu Ming walked out of a portal that had appeared out of nowhere. Because of some special power that I have mastered, the sea level is ineffective against me. I can take out Marduk's hand axe, but that axe probably won't have much effect on Tiamat. Before Wu Ming could finish, a small figure jumped into Wu Ming's arms and interrupted Wu Ming's speech. Master, the green-haired little girl called out in a childish voice, which confused Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming felt the connection between himself and the little girl in his arms and suddenly showed an expression of disbelief. You are Funbaba? Funbaba didn't answer. She just hugged Wu Ming's neck and rubbed against him like a small animal that was close to humans. And this was a gesture that Funbaba liked to do to Wu Ming. What's going on? Wu Ming looked at Quizzard and Ishtar. Funbaba was with the two at that time. Even if you ask, we don't know what's going on, Quizzard and Ishtar were also depressed. How could Funbaba suddenly turn into a human? They originally thought that it was related to Wu Ming, but it turned out that Wu Ming didn't know either. Regarding this matter, Gilgamesh and Chaldea also discussed it, but because Tiamat's matter was more important, they put it aside and didn't discuss it. Therefore, they didn't know what was going on. However, someone knew. It's probably because she followed you all year round, which caused Funbaba's body to change. A gentle and familiar voice entered everyone's ears. Gadotsi and the others' faces froze, only Gilgamesh's eyes inexplicably lit up. In the next second, a beautiful green-haired person also walked out of the portal and stood beside Wu Ming. She stretched out her hand and smiled as she stroked Funbaba's cheeks and hair. This person was Enkidu. In an instant, a beautiful picture seemed to appear in front of everyone. It was a picture of a warm family of three. Wu Ming hugged Funbaba, and Enkidu stood beside him. It was like a father hugging his daughter, and his wife stood beside him with a smile. Upon closer inspection, Enkidu and Funbaba both had green hair. Just this point alone made Funbaba look very much like Enkidu. If he didn't know that Funbaba and Enkidu didn't have this kind of relationship, even Gilgamesh almost thought that they were mother and daughter. No, in fact, Gilgamesh was already very shocked. Senior Villo, please be careful. Matthew was the first to summon his shield, and looked worriedly in Wu Ming's direction. Listen, is that an enemy? Gadotsi also shouted in panic. However, other than Gadotsi and Matthew, the others didn't do anything. It seemed that the green-haired person opposite them was one of them. "Don't worry, this person beside me is the real Enkidu." Wu-ming naturally understood what Gadotsi and Matthew were worried about. Naturally, they were worried that the person beside Wu-ming was Kingu. Well, that seemed to be right. The others didn't do anything because they saw that the person beside Wu-ming wasn't Kingu. After hearing Wu-ming's explanation, they all nodded as expected. Logically speaking, Kingu should be using Enkidu's appearance, so other than Kingu, only Enkidu would look like this. Since that was the case, for those who hadn't seen Enkidu before, this person must be Enkidu. However, Ishtar was a little confused. She had seen Enkidu before, so why was Enkidu filled with the aura of a young girl? Not only Ishtar, but Gilgamesh was also shocked, just as Wu-ming had guessed. His originally sexless best friend had turned into a woman? What was going on? Enkidu. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other in confusion, but looking at the reactions of the people around them, it seemed, probably really was Enkidu. However, Kingu and Enkidu looked exactly the same, so it was normal for Gadotsi and Matthew to mistake them for each other. Kingu is a new consciousness born in Enkidu's body. Enkidu has returned to this body, and this body's consciousness has merged with Enkidu. Now there is no Kingu, only Enkidu. Everyone suddenly understood. After all, who would have thought that Kingu was a consciousness born in Enkidu's body? Gilgamesh thought that Kingu couldn't be Kingu, but he also didn't think that Kingu was a consciousness born in Enkidu's body. Although Enkidu was a god's clay, it wasn't a special existence. Its body shouldn't have any consciousness after death, unless someone tampered with it. Gilgamesh narrowed his eyes. There was no doubt that the person who tampered with it was the culprit behind the burning of humanity. However, not everyone thought as far ahead as Gilgamesh. Everyone was focused on what was happening in front of them. Merge? Like Ms. Ishtar? Matthew asked with a vivid analogy. However, Ishtar shook her head, indicating that she wasn't as pure as Enkidu. Enkidu's situation isn't exactly the same as mine. Kingu was originally a consciousness born in Enkidu's body. Now that Enkidu was summoned back by Wu-ming, even if they merged, the two of them were originally a consciousness born in the same body. Logically speaking, it should be purer than mine. As she spoke, Ishtar hesitated. Chapter 1007. That's right, Ishtar's expression was very conflicted. The other party was indeed Enkidu. She could vaguely see a hint of disgust in Enkidu's eyes. Only Enkidu would look at her like that. Kingu would not. But, logically speaking, Enkidu should not have the aura of a young girl. Could it be that there was an unexpected change due to the fusion? It was because of this that Ishtar hesitated. But this was the only conclusion she could make at the moment. Even Gilgamesh came to the same conclusion, or rather, he did not want to delve into it. This was indeed his close friend. Through unintentional eye contact, he could tell that this was not Kingu. Anyway, as long as it was Enkidu, it did not matter if it was a man or a woman. This was the magnanimity of the most ancient king. Actually, there was a small accident in the middle. Anyway, this is Enkidu without a doubt. Wu-ming made up an excuse. After determining Enkidu's identity, Wu-ming did not dwell on the issue of Funbaba turning into a human and returned to the original topic. If we use Marduk's hand axe to deal with Gorgon, it will definitely work. But if we use it to deal with Tiamat, I really don't think it will work. Wu-ming still had the same opinion. He could indeed retrieve Marduk's hand axe from Eric Metropolis that was submerged by the Black Sea, but it would take twice the effort for half the result. In short, Wu-ming was still against it. As expected, even Hyunryong said so. Chaldea's Roman let out a sigh. Since Hyunryong said so, there's a high chance that it won't work. Leonardo da Vinci added. Ishtar nodded as well. Hyunryong may be a foreign god, but in certain aspects, she does no more than I do. Ishtar's expression was slightly unnatural. However, Gilgamesh would not let go of any opportunity to reprimand Ishtar. Het, you are the goddess of greed who is obsessed with gems. Of course, you don't know as much as a foreign god. Ishtar's body trembled. There was no doubt that he was right. There was nothing that could be done about it. Ishtar had been spoiled by all the gods. She had long been neglecting her duties. Even the bull of the sky, if it was any other normal Sumer god, they would more or less have some information about Tiamat. Although Ereshkigal was also a god of the Sumer pantheon, she was not a normal god. However, as everyone knew, Ereshkigal lived in the depths of the underworld all year round. She did not care about worldly affairs and only cared about the underworld. To be honest, she did not know much about Tiamat. As for Wuming, a foreign god, it was already good enough that he knew more than Ishtar. After all, he was only an outsider who had stayed in Mesopotamia for less than 100 years. His joining of the Sumer pantheon was caused by the later generations of the Sumer pantheon. So what if I don't know? Isn't it fine as long as the Xianlong is here? Ishtar yelled at Gilgamesh as if she had nothing left to lose. This made Gilgamesh, who was delighted by Ishtar's embarrassment, laugh heartily. Ishtar's trusting words made Wuming feel a little embarrassed. In fact, he did not understand either. What did he know? He was just a super high hypostasis dragon who had stayed in Mesopotamia for less than 100 years. At first, he just wanted to recover from his injuries and find Yggdrasil, who had fused with Finbaba, so he made an agreement with Lugarbanda. He would protect the Uruk, and the Uruk would believe in him. If it were not for the group of Sumer gods who came to Wuming to chat and sound him out, Wuming would not care about the Sumer pantheon. Maybe he did not even know who the king of the Sumer pantheon was, let alone Tiamat. The reason why Wuming said that Martyr's hand axe did not work was entirely because Tiamat had the origin of black mud. Just like Az-Dakaha, the whole dragon changed after he had the origin of black mud. His abilities were all different from before. It could be said that if it were not for Wuming in the Hakata world, the upper level of the Hakata world would have perished, let alone the lower level. However, although Wuming knew his own situation, Wuming was not the pot calling the kettle black. But the others did not know that. They all thought that Wuming made a judgment on the premise that he understood Tiamat. In their opinion, since Wuming said that it did not work, it was probably true. Everyone's face sank, probably because the only way to work on Tiamat at present was also ineffective. Gilgamesh was the only one who smiled. But giving up without trying isn't this king's character. Or, Hyunryong, do you have a good idea? This was Gilgamesh's trust in Wuming. He believed that Wuming must have a way. However, Wuming did not answer Gilgamesh's question. Instead, he looked at Merlin, who had not spoken much. Merlin, what do you think? Merlin was not a taciturn person like Anna, but surprisingly, Wuming did not hear Merlin speak after arriving here. Me? What can I possibly think of it? Merlin tried to play dumb. Wuming did not believe that Merlin insisted on going to Eric Metropolis alone without a purpose. Wuming knew very well that the Eric Metropolis had a roller seal that could predict the future. Merlin might have seen something. But since Merlin did not want to speak in front of everyone, Wuming decided to ask him in private later. Actually, I have been preparing my trump card. I need some time. Everyone couldn't help but widen their eyes. Can you deal with Tiamat? Gadotsi couldn't help but ask. Everyone's eyes were also focused on Wuming. Yes. Wuming's answer was simple and clear, as if he had a 100% chance of winning. However, Wuming had no intention of explaining what his trump card was, which made Ishtar a little irritable. She actually knew Wuming very well, not because of their teacher-student relationship, but because they were rivals. As the saying goes, the person who knows you best is not your friend, but your enemy. Ishtar used to fight with Wuming all day long and was defeated by him. Because of this, Ishtar, who studied Wuming every day, was familiar with Wuming. She knew that Wuming would not fight a battle without preparation. Since Wuming said yes, then there must be no problem. However, back to the past, no problem was no problem. Ishtar's irritable temper was one thing, but Ishtar's irritable temper was another. Because when it came to Ishtar's irritable temper, it was Wuming who kept her in suspense. Damn it, Hyunryong, can't you be more straightforward? You're always keeping me in suspense. Ishtar crossed his arms in front of his chest and glared at Wuming while gnashing his teeth. You really aren't cute, Ishtar. You have the same face, but Ereshkigal is cuter. Everyone was stunned. Right, there was still Ereshkigal. Chapter 1008. If it were not for Wuming's words, everyone would not have been able to react. Because of Tiamat, after Gorgon left, everyone directly ignored Ereshkigal, the last figure of the three goddesses' alliance. When did you go to see Ereshkigal? Ishtar calmed down, as if she was somewhat dissatisfied with Ereshkigal. Gorgon's exit was the work of me and Ereshkigal. When Wuming said this, everyone understood why Gorgon left the North Wall in confusion. It turned out that the two Sumer gods worked together to deal with Gorgon. But Ereshkigal should be restricted by the three goddesses' alliance. Quizzard suddenly said. Then Wuming nodded. Yes, because of this, Ereshkigal's divinity has almost completely disappeared, and the entire spirit base can only be forcibly maintained by the underworld. It has no combat power. Wuming's implication was to tell everyone that Ereshkigal was no longer a threat, and there was no need to treat her as an enemy. Those who died suddenly have also been resurrected, presumably Ereshkigal released their souls. Gilgamesh also interjected, proving that Ereshkigal was on the side of the humans. Really, how did that guy end up in such a sorry state? Ishtar complained proudly, but it was obvious that she was concerned about Ereshkigal. Seeing Ishtar's insincerity, Wuming could not help but smile. But don't worry, I have already given my divinity to Ereshkigal, and now she is fine, and I have also told her that if there is no other way, I will ask her for help, and she has agreed. Ishtar was shocked, and her hands could not help but relax. However, before she had time to express her surprise, someone spoke first. You gave all your divinity to Ereshkigal? Roman of Chaldea exclaimed through the projection. But how is this possible? I have never heard of divinity being given away. This king also wants to give his divinity to others, but unfortunately, this king is the king who separates the human from the gods, so he must have part of the divinity. Gilgamesh spoke to shut Roman's mouth. The implication was that it was not impossible to take out the divinity. Indeed, no god had ever said that divinity could not be given away, and no magician had ever proven whether divinity could be given away. No did not mean can't. Why do I feel that you are weird now? Quizzard said. Quizzard probably did not notice Wuming's divinity because of the disappearance of all his divinity and Tiamat's crisis. Merlin and Anna also looked at Wuming a few more times. Only Gadatsi and Matthew, who did not understand, were confused. Is it difficult to give away divinity? For Gadatsi, divinity was a strange thing, and it was like a consumable. In fact, Gadatsi was not wrong. Didn't Ereshkigal use her divinity to suppress Gorgon? It's troublesome to explain. Let's put it this way, you can understand that the divinity of a god is equivalent to the humanity of a human. It was indeed his credit to protect the Uruk, but it was also because of the spirit of the humans of this era. Gilgamesh had already told everyone that the world would usher in the end as early as 6 months ago. What did you see when you went to Erech Metropolis? Wuming did not talk to Merlin anymore and directly jumped to the main topic. The battle between the three-headed dragon and the creator dragon god. Merlin was not pretentious and bluntly answered Wuming's question. As expected. What was Wuming thinking? Wuming was, of course, Merlin saw the future from the roller seal of Erech Metropolis. In other words, the future changed by Wuming. Chapter 1009. I was shocked when I saw several futures with my clairvoyance. Now I can finally see a fixed future. Although Merlin, as a nightmare, did not have the colorful emotions of humans, Merlin liked to see happy endings. However, Merlin could not even see an accurate future, let alone happy endings. Instead, he saw several inaccurate futures. There was a future where Chaldea was completely destroyed and Mesopotamia was destroyed. There was a future where Chaldea did not arrive and only King Gilgamesh was left in Mesopotamia. There was even a future where this singularity did not exist at all. How could Merlin, who could not see an accurate future, not worry? However, Wuming spread his hands. There is no fixed and accurate future. What you see is the possible direction of a parallel world. As Wu Ming said, the future was not fixed. Even without Wu Ming as a variable, there would be many futures, which would lead to the birth of parallel worlds. However, with Wu Ming's existence as a singularity, its fate would inevitably change and deviate from the original future. This was certain. It was also because of Wu Ming's interference that Merlin could not see an accurate future, so it was understandable that he was worried. Perhaps Gilgamesh's clairvoyance could not see the future, so he anxiously asked Merlin to find the clay tablet of destiny to see what the future engraved on the tablet said. Things like the future should be experienced by oneself. If you know everything, then what's the point? Maybe the moment you see the future will change because of it. Wu Ming's implication was that he did not believe in the so-called future. Oh, if only King Gilgamesh could be as open-minded as you. You have to know that when he asked me to go out and find the clay tablet of destiny, it cost me my life. When the 11 magical beast commanders had appeared in the north, Merlin had relied on his illusion to explore the north with great difficulty. He had been very careful, afraid that he would be discovered and slaughtered by the magical beast commanders. It was at that time that Merlin happened to meet Anna, who had just been summoned to this singularity. If Merlin had discovered it a little later, perhaps Anna would have already died at the hands of the magical beast commander. Heng, you've been cooped up in the pagoda all day. It's time for you to come out and get some exercise. Wu Ming and Merlin once again laughed at his misfortune. You'd better spare me. Merlin found it troublesome to even recite an incantation, let alone go outside. He was a total shut-in. Forget it. Let's stop here. Merlin turned around and walked towards the door. I still have half a piece of butter cake in the Chaldean embassy. I might not be able to eat it in the future, so I have to enjoy it. Merlin, who had already guessed this outcome, even cast a magic spell on the butter cake to maintain its freshness. Hey, it's the end of the world. Are you going to eat cake to get through it? Wu Ming looked at Merlin with an annoyed expression. Oh, well, anyway, with you here, I think the 3-headed dragon will be enough to deal with Tiamat. Merlin, who had turned around, chuckled. No matter how stupid Merlin was, he knew that the 3-headed dragon was Wu Ming's trump card. Although the 3-headed dragon was one level lower than the god of creation, Tiamat, if it was Wu Ming's trump card, then there was no need to worry. Wu Ming must have done something to it. You trust me that much? Wu Ming couldn't help but smile. That's for sure. Aren't the others the same? Gadotzi and Matthew trusted Wu Ming because of his relationship with Wu Ming. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci trusted Wu Ming because he had helped Chaldea a lot on this path of humanity's destruction. Moreover, Wu Ming was powerful, and there was no other way but to rely on him. Gilgamesh trusted Wu Ming without a reason, and so did Enkidu. Ishtar trusted Wu Ming for similar reasons. The leopard man relied on his beastly instincts, while Anna followed the crowd to a certain extent. Quizzard did not completely trust him, but there was no other way. If worse came to worst, she would risk her life to attack Tiamat. Although she was a South American goddess, Quizzard was actually a goddess who came to South America from another planet. In a desperate situation, she might be able to kill Tiamat. On the other hand, Merlin trusted Wu Ming because of their old friendship. To be honest, when I found out that you didn't tell me about Leah's future, I wanted to slap you the next time we meet, Wu Ming joked. At first, Wu Ming was still very weak and could not change the ending of King Arthur. Even if he did change a part of it, it still ended with the fall of Arthur's dynasty. Merlin, who had the all-seeing eye, did not tell Wu Ming about it. Hey, you're the one who messed with my all-seeing eye, okay? Wu Ming understood what Merlin meant. It was because of him that Merlin could not see the future. Otherwise, Wu Ming would have slapped Merlin a long time ago. Merlin also thought that he could not see the future and thought that Artoria's future would be changed. Who would have thought that the end result would still be the same? Let's not talk about this anymore. Wu Ming shook his head and walked to Merlin, obviously wanting to leave with Merlin. You're not going to steal my butter cake, are you? What are you thinking? I have something to talk to Anna about, so I'll go to the Chaldean embassy with you. Wu Ming looked at Merlin with disdain. I see. Ahem, but if you want to eat butter cake, you can tell me. I'll give you a piece. After all, you're my best friend. Heh, I want all of it. Of course, it was a joke. However, Merlin seemed to take it seriously. He did not want to go back with Wu Ming. The two chatted as they left the tower and walked toward the Chaldean embassy not far away. When the two passed by an alley, Wu Ming suddenly stopped and turned his head to look at the alley. In the alley, there was an old man in tattered clothes leaning against the wall. The old man's eyes were covered by a tattered hood, and he looked like he was asleep. Merlin's eyes lit up when he saw the old man, and then he smiled. Oh, I'll go back and enjoy my butter cake first. In the end, only Wu Ming and the old man were left in the alley. Wu Ming walked into the alley and sat down face to face with the old man. What do you want from me? Wu Ming also opened the dragon nest dimension and took out a piece of meat pie and handed it to the old man. The old man looked up and stared at Wu Ming with eyes as sharp as an eagle's. After the old man stared at Wu Ming for a while, Wu Ming could not hold back anymore. Chapter 10:10. Seeing an old man like you, anyone would give you some food. And I'm not giving you alms, I'm here to exchange information with you. Interesting. The old man responded to Wu Ming with a deep voice. His voice was full of vigor, just like his eyes. He didn't look like a weak old man at all. Then I'll accept it, the old man said as he reached out and took the pie in Wu Ming's hand. By the way, this is beef filling. You're lucky. Wu Ming smiled mischievously. However, the old man didn't hesitate because of Wu Ming's words and calmly accepted Wu Ming's pie. Seeing that his prank didn't work, Wu Ming smacked his lips and began to talk business. You went to find Tiamat? There was no doubt that this old man was the first Hassan. In Wu Ming's view, the first Hassan only came to him for one thing, and that was Tiamat. The primordial mother is different from before, I can't get close. Wu Ming wasn't surprised by the first Hassan's words. After Wu Ming learned that Tiamat had the black soil, he didn't expect others to attack Tiamat. Sure enough, even the first Hassan couldn't get close to Tiamat. It was very likely that Tiamat's assimilation power was too strong. Forget it, you don't owe me a favor anyway. The first Hassan owed Gadazi a favor, and the one who needed help was Gadazi. It had nothing to do with Wu Ming. Even if it had something to do with Wu Ming wouldn't care. You protect Tachika in the dark, I'll do the rest. That's my destiny. The first Hassan nodded. After this short exchange, Wu Ming left the alley. The first Hassan came to tell Wu Ming about Tiamat's unexpected situation. There wasn't much to say at the moment, so Wu Ming left. However, Wu Ming realized a problem from this. Tiamat was not weaker than Gidia. Even if she wasn't stronger, she was at least on par with Gidia. Wu Ming now already knew the identity of Gidia. It was the #1 beast of human evil, Beast Eye. Although Wu Ming had never seen Tiamat, according to the level of the god of creation, she shouldn't be lower than Gidia. Wu Ming already suspected. Wu Ming. I have to be a little more serious. After Wu Ming said that, Kalas on his head understood what Wu Ming meant. The trump card, that was almost completed, was accelerated by Kalas, who was in the route. By tomorrow, Wu Ming's trump card would be completed. After leaving the alley, Wu Ming walked back to the Chaldean embassy. The reason he came to this street was to find Anna to deal with some matters. Meeting the first Hassan was a surprise. The Chaldean embassy was not far from the alley where Wu Ming met the first Hassan. After Wu Ming walked out of the alley, it didn't take long for him to reach the Chaldean embassy. However, just as he walked to the entrance of the Chaldean embassy, Wu Ming heard Merlin scream. "Ah, Kezapalug, it's my fault, don't kick me anymore." Suddenly, the scene of Fufu kicking Merlin's face appeared in Wu Ming's mind. Or perhaps, Merlin had already been kicked down, and Fufu continued to kick his face even more fiercely. Wu Ming lifted the curtain at the entrance and walked straight in. Sure enough, Merlin was lying on the ground, and Fufu was lying on Merlin's face, constantly poking Merlin's cheeks with his palms. There were several handprints of Fufu on Merlin's face. After seeing Wu Ming's arrival, Fufu immediately gave up on teaching Merlin a lesson. Like an agile little animal, he directly ran up the stairs and left Wu Ming's sight. Sure enough, Fufu was still afraid of Wu Ming as always. "What's wrong with you? You went to that little guy again? Wu Ming, who walked to Merlin's side, pulled Merlin up. Merlin smiled awkwardly. Ah, my butter cake is gone, and Kezapulug happened to have traces of butter cake on his mouth. Next, Merlin didn't need to Wu Ming to know that Merlin must have thought that his treasured butter cake was eaten by Fufu, so he went to reason with Fufu, or maybe even wanted to teach Fufu a lesson. As a result, Merlin was taught a lesson by Fufu. That's good, don't eat it, what's Tiamat's rank? Merlin definitely knew this question. Wu Ming's sudden question made Merlin stunned for a few seconds. The question of a beast was obviously at the level of the apocalypse. How could Wu Ming be as relaxed as asking about food and water? But Merlin still answered truthfully. The second beast, Beast 2. Wu Ming nodded, thinking that Tiamat was also called a beast. By the way, where are Tachika and the others? Merlin pointed upstairs. Tachika and Matthew fell asleep after coming back. Probably because you are here, their tense nerves are rarely relaxed. In addition, I also cast a slight sleep illusion on them. They are now in a state of rest where they won't be easily disturbed by external sounds. Indeed, according to the character of Gadotsi and Matthew, if Wu Ming wasn't there, the two of them would probably not be able to sleep because of Tiamat. At most, they could only take a nap for a while. Sure enough, the task of saving the world is still too heavy for two little girls. Yes, in Wu Ming's eyes, Gadotsi and Matthew were just two little girls. Excluding all external factors, Wu Ming also wanted to help them because of this. It's still a matter of mentality. You see, the people in the city look like they are having a party. Merlin walked to the window and looked at the people coming and going on the street outside. There was no fear on everyone's face. Instead, it was like an ordinary day. There were even many smiling faces. They can still smile in the 6 months of the demonic beast invasion. It really proves that their mentality is much better than Tachika and Matthew, but that's just a matter of time. Gadotsi and Mashu were modern people, but these people were from the gods' generation. In Wu Ming's view, the people under the rule of Gilgamesh wouldn't be melancholy because of the doomsday that had yet to come. If they were melancholy because of this, it would be a waste of the time before the doomsday. Yes, humans have been trying to enjoy every day. It's really great. Merlin looked at all this with a smile and seemed to enjoy it quite a bit. Wu Ming felt that Merlin was more and more strange. Even if it was a half-dream demon, it was still a half-dream demon. And for a half-dream demon, nightmares were delicious. How could people who smiled have nightmares? And Merlin liked to see human happy endings. How could this not be strange? However, it was precisely because of this that Merlin could become friends with Wu Ming. I'm back. At this moment, a greeting voice suddenly came from the door. Wu Ming turned his head and looked. Anna? Chapter 10-11. Yes, it was the girl Anna who walked in from the door, but now she no longer covered her face with the hood of the cloak, and there was a smile on Anna's face. Welcome back, Anna. Did you go to the old lady's house in the nearby flower shop again? Wu Ming glanced at Merlin. When he heard Merlin say that Gadotsi and Matthew were sleeping, he also thought that Anna was also sleeping, so he didn't ask where Anna was. In the end, Anna just went out. It could only be said that Merlin played a word game with him. Of course, in the end, it was still Wu Ming who didn't pay attention to this. Well, I still have to go out. I just came back to put something away. Anna nodded silently. She wasn't surprised that Merlin knew her whereabouts. After all, Merlin was a voyeur. But today, Anna was in a good mood, so she wasn't going to trouble Merlin. Later, under the puzzled eyes of Wu Ming and Merlin, Anna walked into the kitchen and immediately walked out. After Anna walked out, Wu Ming immediately spoke. Anna, I have something to ask you. Anna stopped when she heard this, as if she was a little hesitant. Seeing that Anna seemed to have something to do, Wu Ming proposed a solution. It's just a very ordinary thing. I'll go out with you. We can finish it on the way. Anna thought about it and finally nodded. Later, Wu Ming and Anna walked out of the Chaldean embassy together. After seeing the two leave, Merlin walked into the kitchen to see what Anna had just taken or put away. As a result, he saw a plate on the kitchen table with a trace of cake left on it. This is the plate I put the butter cake on? Merlin's cry came from the kitchen, alarming the foo-foo upstairs. Gudutzi and Matthew did not hear Merlin's cry because of Merlin's illusion. On the street, Wuming glanced at the elven embassy behind him. He seemed to have heard Merlin's sorrowful cry. Or was Wuming hallucinating? Anna, on the other hand, noticed that the wailing belonged to Merlin, but she did not feel guilty at all. "What's the matter?" Anna's sudden question made Wuming ignore Merlin's sorrowful cry. "I have something for you." Then, Wuming waved his hand and a golden ripple appeared in front of Anna. A golden shadow appeared and fell out. Anna subconsciously grabbed it. "This is the Holy Grail?" That's right, Anna was holding the Holy Grail in her hand. However, Anna was a little puzzled. Why did Wuming give her the Holy Grail? "I took this Holy Grail from Winterwood City. Sakura Medu, who was taken away by me, was sealed in the Holy Grail." Wuming's words made Anna's body tremble. As the first master she met, Anna was quite fond of the young Sakura Medu. After learning that Sakura Medu's entire world was burned down, Anna was more than once worried about what would happen to Sakura Medu after she left. Fortunately, in the end, Wuming promised to take good care of Sakura Medu, so Anna left without any worries. Anna originally thought that Sakura Medu would be taken to that place called Chaldea. In the end, Anna did not expect that Sakura Medu would be stuffed into the Holy Grail by Wuming. Cough cough. It's not that it's not good for her. The Holy Grail is more than half a magic furnace. Staying in the Holy Grail for a long time and receiving a large amount of magic power baptism, it's good for increasing her potential and ability as a magician. Wuming seemed to be forcing an explanation as he said it without blushing. At first, Wuming only wanted to temporarily store Sakura Medu in the Holy Grail and release Sakura Medu when he was free. In the end, who would have thought that a series of events would occur, causing Wuming to have no choice but to entrust the Holy Grail to Kingu. Fortunately, Kingu did not do anything to Sakura Medu, or rather, it did not discover that Sakura Medu was in the Holy Grail. In the end, after a series of events, it returned to Wuming's hands. However, what Wuming said about increasing Sakura Medu's ability was not false. When Sakura Medu came out of the Holy Grail, her magic circuit and the quality of her magic power would be greatly improved. Wuming came to find Anna to exchange Sakura Medu with Anna. At the very least, Sakura Medu and Anna had to meet. When to release Sakura Medu from the Holy Grail was also up to Anna to decide. You probably think that you appeared because of Gorgon, but I think that you appeared because of Sakura Medu. After Wuming finished speaking, he closed his mouth, and Anna also fell into silence. The two of them did not stop walking. As Anna, who was extremely compatible with Sakura Medu, and both of them were quite young, the relationship between Sakura Medu and Sakura Medu was no longer limited to the relationship of master and servant. The two of them were already friends, and even the only family. Perhaps Sakura Medu, who was sleeping in the Holy Grail, subconsciously summoned Anna in this era. But no matter what, Sakura Medu was fine, and that was the most important thing. "Anna, is this the place?" Wuming's words pulled Anna back from her thoughts. Anna looked up and saw that she had already arrived in front of a shop with all kinds of flowers. "Yes, it's here." Anna nodded. Wuming squatted down and touched Anna's little head. "I also know about her situation. After the human nature fever is over, I will properly deal with her problem, but for now, you should keep the Holy Grail in her safe." Then, Wuming stood up, turned around, and left. While Anna continued to be in a daze, an old woman walked out of the flower shop with some trembling. "Anna, you're back." Hearing the old woman's voice, Anna instantly hid the Holy Grail under her cloak. "Yes, Grandma, I'm back." Did the plate with the butter cake properly return to its original position? Oh, sure enough, the butter cake brought by Anna is more delicious than the one I made. This old woman also rarely enjoyed it. The old woman seemed to be reminiscing, her squinted eyes slightly opened. Anna knew that this old woman was too old to taste anything, but at this moment, the old woman was really reminiscing, which meant that she tasted the flavor of the butter cake. Anna didn't notice this before. Obviously, someone did something to the butter cake. Anna thought to herself. Yes, I put it back in the kitchen. Grandma, I still think that the butter cake you made is delicious, but next time I will bring you such delicious butter cake again. No need, Anna, this old woman isn't used to such good food, you can keep it for yourself in the future. You are the most beautiful girl I have ever seen, don't wrong yourself. After all, even if this old woman can safely survive the apocalypse, she doesn't have much time left. Also, if you like the butter cake I made, I will make it for you every time you come. No need, Grandma, you need more rest, I will continue to help you take care of the flowers. Anna continued to chat with the old woman while busying herself in the old woman's shop. The old woman took out a garland when Anna wasn't paying attention. Wu-ming didn't continue to watch, but turned around and left. After all, Wu-ming also guessed what would happen next. Not far away, in the Chaldean embassy, Merlin washed the plate that Anna returned before and put it aside. Then he stroked the head of Fufu who came beside him without him knowing. So it was Anna who fed you a little before taking away the cake? Cassapalug. Chapter 10-12. Wu-ming came to the Uruk wall where the seal of divinity, Dinger, was placed and looked towards the southwest. At this moment, the dark clouds were approaching the Uruk. Although the sea of black mud could not be seen with the naked eye, Wu-ming could still feel that the sea level was rising. The sea of black mud that was blocked by Nabistan's tooth was getting more and more turbulent. As the last few humans in the north had retreated into the Uruk, countless Ramu that could not find any living humans were wandering around the vast land outside the Uruk. They were going crazy because they could not enter the Uruk. However, the number of the mermaid Kuru, one of the 11 mythical beasts, was decreasing. It seemed like the other Rama had killed them and turned them into Ramu. However, no matter how many Ramu there were, they could not enter the wizardry barrier that was set up by Wu-ming's relic above the Uruk. Bless the world with this body, my god treat, level, A++ type, wizardry relic distance, maximum catch. Hyun-ryong, who was defined as a god, was separated from the humans and returned to heaven. This relic was created by the humans' belief in Hyun-ryong. It was the last bit of power that protected the humans. It represented the separation of humans and God, which was the gradual disappearance of mysteries. After that, the era of gods would completely disappear and the humans would usher in their own era. The specific effect was that mysteries that were malicious to the humans would be annihilated while mysteries that were kind to the humans would be weakened. This relic represented the irreversible force of the separation of humans and gods and the disappearance of the era of gods. Although it had a certain effect on Wu-ming and the rest, it only weakened them and did not affect them much. To the mythical beasts, not only were they separated, but they were also hostile to the humans. Therefore, when the light film shrouded the Uruk, a small number of Ramu and Kuru in the Uruk light film were physically separated. However, if it was to deal with Tiamat, this relic might not be enough to separate her. Therefore, as long as Tiamat personally came, the human race would definitely perish. However, no matter how hard Wu-ming looked, he could not see a trace of Tiamat's figure. Hiding underground was even more ridiculous. Zhuge Kong-ming had already moved the Stone Warrior 8 formations to the southeast. If Tiamat was moving underground, they would be able to discover it. Since there was no sign of Tiamat, it was obvious that Tiamat had not moved at all. Do you think that Ramu alone can destroy mankind? Or does Tiamat have other secrets? Wu-ming muttered to himself. Wu-ming believed that the latter was more reliable. At the very least, these Ramu were Tiamat's children. If they could not defeat them after a long time, they would definitely attack Tiamat. His Excellency Hyun-ryong, a lively childlike voice entered Wu-ming's ears. Wu-ming turned his head and found that it was Nuwakimar. There were 2 people behind him. They were the remaining 2 lancers who were guarding the north wall. The soldiers at the north wall had retreated, so they naturally retreated as well. Everyone, how have you been? Wu-ming greeted them. His Excellency Hyun-ryong is thinking about Tiamat's matter? Musasobo Benkei, who followed Nuwakimar to Wu-ming's side, looked into the distance and said in a muffled voice, Tiamat hasn't moved for so long. There must be something going on. Leonidas I answered Musasobo Benkei. We can't continue to waste time with Tiamat. If she doesn't come to us, we have to go to her. Wu Ming's face became firm. They might have to take the initiative to attack. When Nuakamaru and the other two heard this, their faces changed like Wu Ming's, but they also agreed with Wu Ming's words. They had no way to waste time with Tiamat. Several servants belonging to the Uruk were cut off from Gilgamesh's magic supply. They had to rely on food to survive. In addition, all the existing humans in this era were gathered in the Uruk. The food could not last for more than a few days. When the time came, there was no need for Ramu and Tiamat. The humans would starve to death. Your Excellency, do you mean that Tiamat is deliberately wasting time with us? However, Wu Ming shook his head and denied Musasobo Benkei's words. She doesn't need to do this. I suspect that Tiamat is restricted by something and can't move for a while. It was said that Tiamat had a huge dragon body. She only used her body to carry out physical attacks, and humans would be easily defeated. Therefore, Wu Ming believed that Tiamat was temporarily unable to move for some reason. Wu Ming decided to go back and ask Enkidu. She should know about Tiamat. Looking at the gradually darkening sky, Wu Ming shook his head. Let's wait until tomorrow to let everyone have a good rest tonight. Let's have a good rest tonight. If there's anything, we can discuss it tomorrow. The three of them nodded as they understood what Wu Ming meant. At this moment, Tiamat could not move, and the demonic beasts outside Uruk could not enter. Now was a precious and rare time to rest. How could they not make good use of it? It was a quiet night. Whether it was a king or a civilian, whether it was a servant or a master, everyone had a good rest. After all, with Wu Ming's noble phantasm, they did not have to worry about the invasion of demonic beasts. In the Chaldean embassy, Wu Ming woke up early in the morning and began to prepare breakfast. That's right, Wu Ming stayed in the Chaldean embassy last night. As for the room, Wu Ming slept on the roof. The Mesopotamia region was not said to be like spring all year round, but the temperature difference between summer and winter was not very big. Even if he slept outdoors, it would be fine, not to mention that Wu Ming was a servant. I slept so well last night. Gadatsi yawned as she walked down the stairs and came to the first floor. Yes, Senpai. When the doctor contacted me this morning, he said that Senpai's body had an unprecedented rest in all aspects. Matthew echoed behind Gadatsi. Fufu, who was like a squirrel, also called twice. Fufu is also very energetic. Matthew picked up Fufu. Gadatsi did not answer Matthew's previous question because she saw Wu Ming. Assassin, you can cook? Gadatsi looked at Wu Ming, who was wearing a Mesopotamia apron, carrying a stack of food that she did not know the name of, to the table. There were several plates on the table, all of which were filled with food that Gadatsi had never seen before. It smells so good. Matthew also ignored the previous topic because of Wu Ming's food. Whoa, I haven't heard of this food for many years. It reminds me of the story of the king who often went to the kitchen to steal food. Merlin also walked down the stairs in a strange manner. Wu Ming glared at Merlin. Merlin smiled awkwardly and did not speak again. After all, if it wasn't for Wu Ming being merciful last night, Merlin would have been the one sleeping on the roof. Is there butter cake? Anna's slightly shy voice followed Merlin's. There is no butter cake, but I made some modern snacks. Anna can try them later. Mesopotamia's butter cake was somewhat different from modern butter cake, so Wu Ming did not try to make it, but he did bake some modern snacks. Go wash up first. There will be guests later. Guests? Gadatsi and Matthew looked at each other, and both saw doubt in each other's eyes. But it did not matter. They would know later. Chapter 10:13. Everyone came to the table after washing up and sat down. They found that there were more and more dishes on the table, and it didn't seem like the five of them could finish it all. Villo-senpai? How many guests are there? Matthew wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and smiled awkwardly. Don't worry, they're here. Wu Ming pointed to the door, and three figures appeared at the door. Miss Nuakamaru, Mr. Chin, Mr. Leonidas. Matthew was surprised. Mr. Fujimaru, Mr. Matthew, long time no see. Nuakamaru greeted them calmly, but she didn't have much contact with Chaldea, so she didn't say much. Musasobo Benkei and Leonidas I were the same. The three of them were either at the northern wall or at the temporary stronghold built in the northwest, while Fujimaru and the others were either in the Uruk or the dense forest in the south. Although they were familiar with each other, they were only familiar with each other. In terms of familiarity, Wuming was much more familiar to Nuwakamaru than Gratsi and the others. Nuwakamaru and the others sat down calmly, but the inexplicably lengthened table and the dishes on the table still couldn't be finished by 3 more people. At this time, a lively voice came from the door. "Yo, big sister, I'm here." Quizzard dragged the weak leopard man into the Chaldean embassy. She found a seat and sat down, and instantly threw the leopard man to the seat next to her. "Miss Quizzard is here too?" Matthew was surprised again. Grazzi was quite interested in the leopard man's current state, but she could probably guess that he was beaten up by Quizzard because he provoked Quizzard. "I was invited by Hyunryong for breakfast." Quizzard smiled sweetly at Grazzi. "So, Nuwakamaru and the others are the same?" Grazzi guessed. "Yes, Mr. Fujimaru, we're not the only ones invited." As if agreeing with Nuwakamaru's words, another person, or rather a golden king, came in from the entrance of the Chaldean embassy. "Ah, this king's arrival, the entire Chaldean embassy seems to be a lot brighter." The newcomer was naturally Gilgamesh. King Gilgamesh? This time, Grazzi and Matthew were shocked. They really didn't expect Gilgamesh to be among the guests. What's the point of being so arrogant? Even if it's brighter, it's all because of this goddess. Ishtar, who came in later, crossed her arms and looked at Gilgamesh with disdain. "Oh, the goddess of greed even wants to take this king's glory for herself." Gilgamesh mocked mercilessly. "You shiny golden guy? I hope you die of overwork?" However, before Gilgamesh and Ishtar could quarrel, Siduri's figure came in. Okay, king and goddess, today you were invited by Hyunryong-sama to enjoy breakfast. You can't be so rude." Her words, which were neither flattering nor harsh, made Gilgamesh and Ishtar both shut their mouths. "Siduri, the two of them really can't do anything to you." Enkidu, who had a smile on his face, walked in holding Funbaba's hand. "You're exaggerating." Siduri bowed. In this regard, Grazzi and Matthew were almost stunned. Good heavens, all the powerful forces of this era had gathered together. However, only Wuming knew that Ereshkigal was still missing, but that couldn't be helped. After all, she couldn't leave the underworld. "Okay, everyone hurry up and take a seat. This is my cooking that I haven't made for a long time. Hurry up and try it." Hearing this, Gilgamesh and the others also sat down. Seeing so many powerful gods and kings sitting next to them, Grazzi and Matthew were a little uncomfortable. The two were still thinking about whether to change seats. However, Gilgamesh also said that this banquet was hosted by Wuming after all, and even he couldn't steal the limelight. What he meant was, no matter who was in charge, they could sit anywhere. Everyone began to enjoy the food. At this moment, it was as if they really obeyed Gilgamesh's order. Everyone, including Grazzi, was no longer restrained and completely let go of their limbs. Leonidas I and Musasobo Benkei competed in drinking. Quizzard, as the big sister, played with Grazzi. Matthew and Anna discussed which snacks Wuming made were delicious. Gilgamesh and Ishtar were once again at each other's throats, and Siduri was the lubricant between them. Enkidu looked at this scene and smiled helplessly, then looked at Wuming, who was chatting with Nuwakamar. As for the leopard man, he was bragging with Funbaba and Fufu, but he was ignored by the two beasts. Now it didn't seem like they were facing the coming doomsday at all, but more like an ordinary party. Roman, who was in Chaldea and watching this scene through Grazzi's bracelet, sighed. "I really don't know whether to be happy or sad." By the way, Roman showed a tangled expression. Roman was happy to see everyone in a good mood, but their good mood made Roman a little worried. After all, there was still the threat of Tiamat. However, Leonardo da Vinci didn't care so much. Instead, he smiled. This is a bit like a different version of The Last Supper. The Last Supper that Leonardo da Vinci made before his death seemed to be comfortable, but it was actually a crisis. Now, the banquet in the Chaldean embassy was just like that. "You're so careless." Roman rolled his eyes at Leonardo da Vinci. This was probably the benefit of being a servant. There was no need to think too much. But, no matter how you look at it, it's breakfast. Looking at the harmonious table in the monitor, Roman gave up complaining about Leonardo da Vinci, and he gradually immersed himself in this warm scene. After all, it's good to do this occasionally, isn't it? I'm hungry. I'm going to get a cup of coffee. Roman got up and left the monitor. However, Leonardo da Vinci sat in Roman's position and waved at Roman like a rich man. By the way, help me get a cup. The cup is next to the coffee machine, thank you. Yes, understood. The meal was very fast, and the delicious food that everyone enjoyed in Chaldean embassy was quickly wiped out. After that, everyone went to the highest floor of the tower, Gilgamesh's office, between the throne. Gilgamesh, who was sitting on the high throne, glanced at the people standing neatly in front of him and immediately spoke. So, Tiamat's counterattack strategy meeting, let's start now. Gilgamesh's imposing words entered everyone's ears, and most people's faces became extremely serious. The reason why it was most people was because there were a small number of people who didn't become serious, but showed a surprised expression. Hey! Wait a minute, counterattack? Are we going to counterattack Tiamat? Chapter 10:14. Matthew and Gadazzi were the only two people who were surprised. That's right. I think you have also noticed that we don't have much food left, and all the humans in Mesopotamia have gathered in the Uruk. Although there is no problem for the time being, in a few days, the shortage of food will appear, and we will be in trouble. Gadazzi and Matthew heard Wu Ming's words and instantly understood. After all, they were modern people, and they could understand what would happen in the Uruk through the usual compulsory education. At that time, humans would starve to death because they were trapped in the Uruk without food, and in serious cases, there might be riots. After all, appetite was one of the most basic desires of humans, and there was no way to suppress it. Once it broke out, it would be more terrible than a natural disaster. Outside the Uruk were Ramu, and humans could not go out to look for food. Only servants could do it, but there was no way to get food for so many people with only a few servants. Therefore, the only way was to take the initiative to attack, and the main attacker was Wu Ming. Wu Ming talked to Gilgamesh last night about this matter, and Gilgamesh also agreed. In fact, whether we take the initiative to attack or wait for Tiamat to attack, our chances of winning are very low. Leonardo da Vinci's voice came from Gadazzi's bracelet. After all, the opponent was the god of creation. So, whether we take the initiative to attack or passively defend, the probability of winning is almost the same. Although Roman's words were discouraged, it also meant that taking the initiative to attack was better than passively defending. Why didn't Tiamat take the initiative to attack? Gadazzi was quite puzzled. That's because Mother is bound. Enkidu stood up. Bound? Matthew could not help but be stunned. And that's the binding that Tiamat put on herself. Wu Ming interrupted. What? Whether it was Gadazzi, Matthew, or the others, they were more or less surprised by this. But Gadazzi asked. She didn't understand why she would impose restrictions on herself. Because Mother has always loved humans and their children, that's why she added restrictions to herself. Enkidu, who had fused with Kingu, was well aware of this. Wu Ming had also asked Enkidu about this last night. At this moment, Gilgamesh, who was sitting on the throne, suddenly interrupted. Do you know that humans are evil? Humans are evil? Gadazzi and Matthew looked at each other in confusion. The two goddesses, Quizzard and Ishtar, had a serious look in their eyes. It was obvious that the two of them knew that humans were evil. Humans are evil. Roman from Chaldea repeated silently. Humans are evil beasts of original sin. There are a total of 7 original sin beasts, and they are disasters that can destroy humans. Merlin also spoke. But in the end, it was still Roman who explained. Humans are evil refers to various disasters that threaten human history and destroy humans. They are born from human civilization and grow stronger with the development of human civilization. They will destroy the civilization from the inside of human society. They're like cancer cells. Furthermore, as long as human beings exist, this evil will not disappear. It will grow stronger with the development of human civilization. To put it simply, it was an existence that accompanied humans. Because of the disasters caused by the bestial nature of humans, humans are also called beasts. Tiamat is the second beast that holds the principle of return, Beast 2. Merlin finished Roman's sentence, then looked at Wu Ming and signaled for Wu Ming to continue. With a helpless smile, Wu Ming spoke. The essence of human evil is human love. It is precisely because of this that Tiamat, who loves her lover and her children, will become one of the human evils. Gadotsi and Matthew suddenly understood. After that, Wu Ming inexplicably thought of the human final trial he encountered in the box garden world. Moreover, human evil is not the evil that destroys humans, but the evil that destroys humans. That is, the existence that humans need to overcome. Only by overcoming it can humans continue to develop. Therefore, in a sense, it is not wrong to call it the human final trial. After all, human evil is a disaster for humans, and it is not wrong to call it the human final trial. The existence that needs to be overcome, human final trial. Matthew and Gadotsi, who were present as humans, muttered silently. Seeing Gadotsi and Matthew in deep thought, Wu Ming walked in front of the two, stretched out his hand, and gave them a knock on the head. "Ah, it hurts." "Senior Villo." Gadotsi covered her head with tears and looked at Wu Ming. Matthew performed better than Gadotsi. He did not cry out in pain, but she also covered her head. Although it is said that the human final trial needs humans to overcome it, it is just a formality. It is not necessary for humans to overcome it. For the self-destruction mechanism of humans such as the 7 human evils, the suppression force has already prepared a corresponding safety device, which is the 7 crown servants. The shaped moon world is different from the box garden world. In the box garden world, the human final trial is a special existence. To defeat, kill, or even overcome the other party requires special conditions. The most critical condition is that you must have the identity of a human. The human final trial in the shaped moon world is just a title that Wu Ming casually said. It has no special power, so humans do not need to overcome it personally. Seeing the doubts on their faces, Wu Ming directly gave an example. The first Hassan you have seen is the crown assassin. These words directly made Gadotsi and Matthew almost fall to the ground. They knew that the first Hassan was very strong, but they didn't expect the other party to have such an identity. In other words, the reason why the first Hassan helped us is because of the appearance of one of the human evils? However, no one answered Gadotsi's question, because the people present were very clear that Tiamat had undergone a qualitative change. She was no longer a simple human evil. Even the first Hassan couldn't even get close to Tiamat. All of this was attributed to the root black mud, and it was precisely because of this that Wu Ming took all the burden on himself. Emotionally, only Wu Ming could deal with Tiamat, who was infected with the root black mud. Others were easily eroded by the black mud and assimilated. Reasonably, the root black mud and Wu Ming had a great relationship. The reason why Tiamat was infected with the root black mud may have an indirect relationship with Wu Ming. Therefore, Wu Ming had to take on this burden. In short, my trump card can deal with Tiamat. You just need to be responsible for covering me. Chapter 10:15. Wu Ming said as he stretched out his hands and rubbed Gadotsi and Matthew's little heads. In fact, Wu Ming didn't mention one thing. He was worried that Tiamat had other means. Therefore, Wu Ming chose to let himself, the only one who was not afraid of the black root soil, face Tiamat, so as not to let other people have an accident. After being attached by the black root soil, in addition to being hostile to Wu Ming, their own abilities would also be changed or enhanced. That is, the enemy who was already very powerful would become even stronger. As the god of creation, Tiamat was already very strong, and with the blessing of the black root soil, she would definitely become stronger, and maybe she would have some new tricks. The best way was to let some people stay in the Uruk. Wuming had already talked to Gilgamesh about this issue last night. Therefore, Gilgamesh directly ordered, "Now, let's discuss the problem of grouping. After that, let's face the god of creation and launch the final attack." The humans in the Uruk were still doing their duty, and even most of the soldiers were arranged by Gilgamesh to do something within their ability. Only some soldiers were still guarding the 360-degree city wall surrounding the Uruk, and their task was only to be stationed on the city wall to monitor the movements of the Ramu army outside. After all, ordinary human soldiers were not useful at all in this counterattack strategy. Although it was cruel to say that human soldiers couldn't do anything in the face of the Ramu army except to die and increase the combat power of the Ramu army. On the city wall in the southwest corner of the Uruk, Gilgamesh, Gudetsi, Matthew, the followers, and several Quizzards pterosaurs gathered together. However, everyone was clearly divided into two teams and stood in front of Gilgamesh. Quizzard, Ishtar, Gudetsi, Matthew, Merlin, Nuakamaru, and Musasobo Benkei were responsible for covering Wuming. Enkidu, Funbaba, Leonidas I, Anna, and Leopard Man were responsible for guarding the Uruk with Gilgamesh. Quizzard and Ishtar were very powerful goddesses, so naturally, they wouldn't choose to stay behind. Although Nuakamaru was a general-like figure, his class was rider, and his mobility wasn't low, he was more suitable for taking the initiative to attack. After Musasobo Benkei overcame his fear, he had to follow Nuakamaru no matter when and where, unless he died. Nuakamaru had to admit that this made her feel very helpless. Although she was very pleased that Sea Lord Chong Lu had become so brave, there was no need for him to become so excessive, it was almost becoming an obsession. Therefore, Nuakamaru and Musasobo Benkei were assigned to the attack team, and Leonidas I was forced to stay behind because of his strong defensive ability. Enkidu and Funbaba were instructed by Wuming to stay behind, and Anna also stayed behind because of Wuming's concern. After all, Anna still needed to protect the Holy Grail where Sakura Madu was. As for the Leopard Man, he was instructed by Quizzard to stay behind. According to Quizzard's words, don't underestimate the Leopard Man. However, anyone could tell that this wasn't the real reason. In short, Wuming was relieved to have a good defensive team guarding the Uruk. Moreover, there was also Zhuge Kong Ming, who hadn't shown his face since returning to the Uruk. Wuming believed that even if there was an accident, the Uruk would be safe with the presence of staying behind. As for why Merlin joined the attack team, it was entirely because he was coerced by Wuming. With Gilgamesh and Zhuge Kong Ming, there was no need for Merlin to stay behind at all. In addition, Merlin had been pretending to be weak, so Wuming, who was a little unhappy, made this decision. Finally, it was Gudetsi and Matthew. Gudetsi and Matthew could stay in the Uruk. There was no need for them to go out and take risks. Although Gudetsi and Matthew's decision was strongly opposed by the two at first, after listening to Gudetsi's reason, the way everyone looked at Gudetsi changed. Human evil needs to be overcome by humans. I won't and don't want to escape. Even if the main attacker was Wuming, Gudetsi believed that as the only master of mankind and one of the last remaining humans, she had to bear witness to all this. It didn't matter even if the end was really death. Wuming was very sure that Gudetsi was touched by his previous words. Although he was worried about Gudetsi's safety, Wuming also felt gratified for Gudetsi at the same time. It was the kind of gratification that one would feel when seeing their younger sister grow up. And not only Wuming, but the others were also touched by this. If Quizzard and Ishtar still regarded Gudetsi as an immature little girl before, now, they have regarded Gudetsi as a real qualified master. Matthew was affected by Gudetsi's strong inner feelings and supported Gudetsi's idea. Moreover, as Gudetsi's follower, Matthew had no reason to let his master go to the front line alone. Therefore, Matthew would also follow Quizzard and others to cover Wuming. For the decision of the two, Gilgamesh also praised Gudetsi and Matthew, saying that there really are people in the future who didn't let this king down. At this moment, Gilgamesh faced the people who were divided into two teams and repeated the content of the plan. The defense team will stay with this king in Uruk to prevent accidents or provide support. The attack team needs to take Quizzard's pterosaur to the Persian Gulf, and then fully cover Hyun-ryong to release his trump card to eliminate Tiamat. Of course, your own safety is the prerequisite, that's all. Is there a problem? No. Although only Gadatsi and Matthew answered, in fact, Gilgamesh was talking to Gadatsi and Matthew. After all, everyone else was a servant. To put it bluntly, the servant's body was not the servant's body. If they died, they would die, and there would be no image. But if Gadatsi and Matthew, as human beings, had an accident, there would be no room for recovery. Then, Roman's voice came from Gadatsi's bracelet. According to the detection, the number of Ramu on the land has exceeded 300 million, and it is still increasing. The speed of the increase of Ramu is also rising rapidly. Roman and Leonardo da Vinci in Chaldea looked at the number of Ramu on the screen that was still increasing, and they couldn't help but frown. Although this was bad news, there was also good news at the same time. However, these Ramu can only move on the ground. There are no aerial units yet. After all, there was already the winged mermaid Kururu that could fly in the sky, so Roman also paid attention to it. But there is no guarantee that there will not be any enemy flying units, so when you get close to Tiamat, you must be very careful. Don't relax your vigilance against the Ramu just because they can fly. Leonardo da Vinci also warned. Of course, he was still talking to Gadatsi and Matthew. Yes, we understand, Leonardo da Vinci. Gadatsi nodded seriously. Finally, as the Uruk king, Gilgamesh issued the final order. So, let's go, everyone. This king is looking forward to your triumphant return. Chapter 10:16. The three Quetzalcoatlus carried Gadatsi, Matthew, Nuakamar, Musasobo Benkei, and Merlin respectively. Quizzard rode on her exclusive Quetzalcoatlus and flew into the sky with the five of them. Ishtar and Wuming both had their own means of flight, so they didn't need Quizzard's Quetzalcoatlus. Under the gaze of the few people stationed in Uruk led by Gilgamesh, the four Quetzalcoatlus, Tianzhou, and a figure who flew into the sky without catching any tools left one after another. Thus, the plan to counterattack Tiamat officially began. In a place where no one could see, Gilgamesh's mouth moved slightly. The future of mankind, please. Because Rama didn't have the ability to fly, and Kuru was close to extinction, the attack team didn't encounter any obstacles in the sky. They soon arrived at the original Persian Gulf coastline. The reason why it was called the original Persian Gulf coastline was because this place had long been submerged by the sea of black mud. And the sky had long been covered by dark clouds, and no trace of sunlight could be seen. Roman, who had repeatedly confirmed the location through the electronic map in Chaldea, spoke with great certainty from Gadatsi's bracelet. It's here. Looking at her bracelet, Gadatsi nodded, then looked at Wuming, who was flying beside her. From here on out, we must be vigilant. After all, the real sea was in front of them, and the depth was different from the submerged land. There was no guarantee that there would be something hidden. In that case, let's fly higher first. After Quizzard finished speaking, the four Quetzalcoatlus all flew higher. Gadatsi was wearing a special magic dress made by Leonardo da Vinci. Even if they flew higher, it wouldn't affect Gadatsi's breathing. Ishtar also increased his altitude. On the other hand, Wu Ming did not increase his altitude. In fact, he even lowered his altitude. That's right, he did this to cover everyone, which was the so-called bait. Danger was often called danger, because it was often hidden in the dark. If the hidden danger could be brought to the light, then Gadatsi and the others would be much safer. Naturally, Wu Ming, who was the strongest, would take the risk. And Wu Ming didn't believe that there was no danger in the sea of black mud. Sure enough, a mouthful of black mud suddenly jumped out of the black mud and bit at Wu Ming. It wasn't exactly a bite because this bloody mouth could swallow Wu Ming in one bite. The kind. Assassin? Gadatsi, who was high in the sky, couldn't help but shout. She didn't see Wu Ming escape from this giant mouth. Could Wu Ming have been eaten? The answer was, of course, no. Senior, look over there. Senior Villo is there. Matthew touched Gadatsi and pointed to the sky in the distance. Wu Ming's figure was floating there steadily, and beside Wuming was a dark purple portal. So Assassin managed to escape. I almost forgot about that ability of his. Phew, Gudatzi was relieved and took a deep breath. But what is this thing? Gudazi was naturally talking about the big mouth of the muddy basin below. That's the mouth of a magical beast, Ishtar, who was holding Anna on her horse, said quietly as she flew to Gudatzi and Matthew's side. The mouth of a magical beast? This frightened the two girls. The mouth below was so big that it could eat 4 or 5 people in one bite. How big was the body of such a magical beast? Gudatzi and Matthew weren't the only ones who wanted to see the true face of this magical beast. Others also wanted to know, including Wuming. He wanted to see what the true face of this magical beast that he couldn't detect with his mental strength was. At that moment, Wuming waved his hand, and a book full of ancient meanings suddenly appeared in Wuming's hand. This was a nameless spell book. Every page represented a magic spell, and the further down the page, the higher the level of the magical beast, and the more powerful the spell was. The book moved without wind, and the pages were flipped. Finally, it stopped on a page. This page represented a supreme spell, and it was the kind that didn't require the skill to be shaken and could be used directly. Then, Wuming tore off this page and threw it into the portal beside him that hadn't closed yet. Pa! Wuming snapped his fingers, and the portal closed immediately. However, in the next second, the huge closed mouth suddenly expanded, then suddenly contracted, and then expanded again. The huge mouth opened towards the sky, and the blue and white light of destruction shot straight into the sky. With the huge mouth as the center, the sea of black mud also shook violently. The light of destruction brushed past the feathered serpent that Gudatzi and Matthew were riding, and it gave Gudatzi, Matthew, and the winged serpent a fright. Fufu! Fufu suddenly jumped out of Matthew's shield and howled a few times at the huge mouth below. It seemed that he was also frightened. Fufu? Did you hide in the storage compartment of my shield again? Matthew's shield had been modified by Leonardo da Vinci. It could be used to store supplies or to store recycled holy grails, and Fufu had hidden in it more than once. Worried that Fufu would accidentally fall, Matthew hurriedly hugged Fufu in his arms. You should have stayed in Uruk, Fufu. However, it was useless to say anything at this moment. The key was the true face of the magical beast with the huge mouth. It was a huge dog. Or rather, it was the World of Warcraft Eulidium. Roar! Due to the influence of Wuming's supreme spell, a lot of the black mud on the huge mouth was shaken off, and because of the shaking, the body under the huge mouth was also exposed. It was a huge red-haired dog on all fours, and there was even a lot of black mud on its red hair. The World of Warcraft Eulidium? Gudatzi couldn't believe it. This was a magical beast that was even bigger than the magical beast commander. At this moment, the winged serpent carrying Merlin approached, and Merlin's voice also reached Gudatzi's ears. This is the real son that Tiamat gave birth to alone, one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, the World of Warcraft Eulidium. That's right, it was neither a mass-produced magical beast nor a so-called magical beast commander, but one of the 11 sons of Tiamat, the World of Warcraft Eulidium. I'm afraid that this Black Sea has already become Tiamat's nest. Roman's voice also came from the bracelet. And Tiamat has probably produced all the other magical beasts, Leonardo da Vinci said. As if confirming Leonardo da Vinci's words, Eulidium howled. A whoa! Accompanied by this wolf-like howl, huge figures emerged from the sea of black mud one after another. Chapter 10:17. One after another, huge figures emerged from the sea of black mud. Black mud fell from their bodies bit by bit, revealing their figures. Eulidium, who had the appearance of a wolf dog, the venomous snake Bashmu, the huge sun lion Uggle, the 3-horned lion dragon Uggle, the 7-headed snake Muxiomafu, the demonic bull Kuthaliku, who had abandoned the appearance of a human bull and appeared on all fours, Kitabliru, who had also abandoned the appearance of a scorpion and turned into a giant scorpion, Meshuxiu, who had 4 legs, the angry snake Kuru, who had abandoned the appearance of a mermaid and turned into a giant fish. Beast, Debru, who had obtained the appearance of a shark and was known as the Tempest, and Tiamat's last son, the Chaos Mudman with the same name and identity as the father of gods, Ramu. These were the 11 sons of Tiamat. At the same time, they were also the existences that prevented Wuming from getting close to Tiamat. Gratzi and the others had to protect Wuming from the danger he had to face. Trouble. Even Wuming did not expect that the 11 sons of Tiamat would all appear. However, this was probably the power of the black mud that sped up the birth of Tiamat's new 11 sons. The reason why it was called the 11 sons was because the 11 sons had died long ago. Moreover, these 11 magical beasts were more or less different from the ones recorded in the historical myths. At this moment, the bodies of the magical beasts were basically extremely huge, and the humanoid magical beasts had all turned into their beast forms. The formless Debruta had also turned into a giant shark. Obviously, this was a temporary change made by Tiamat. After all, this was the only way they were real magical beasts. However, Wuming was more concerned about the Ramu. It wasn't much different from the other Ramu in Mesopotamia. At the very least, it wasn't as large as the other Ramu. It was about the same size as the other Ramu, but it was also different from the other mass-produced Ramu. This Ramu's body was not as weak as other mass-produced Ramu. On the contrary, this Ramu's body was abnormally strong. It was even more fit than a bodybuilder. Wuming was sure that this guy was not just for show, but for real. In addition, this Ramu also had a pair of large wings on its back, but they were curled up, so it was hard to tell how big they were. In short, among the 11 magical beasts, Wuming felt that this Ramu was the strongest. WMBFO, YBFDFZXXDMQCSDH, YBFQWLK, CDXMO. The Ramu said something to the other magical beasts, and the 11 magical beasts immediately divided into 2 groups. 5 magical beasts advanced towards the Uruk. Wuming, who could understand the Ramu's words, understood the other party's meaning. They wanted to split into 2 groups. One group would go to the Uruk to completely destroy the humans, and the other group would stay to deal with them. It seemed that these 11 magical beasts had not been lurking for a long time. They were probably just born not long ago. Otherwise, they wouldn't have waited until Wuming and the others attacked the Uruk before going to the Uruk. After all, if 11 of them attacked the Uruk together, the Uruk's light film would most likely not be able to stop them. Fortunately, Wuming had the foresight to let Enkidu, Funbaba, and the others stay in the Uruk. Although it was not foolproof, it was enough. These 11 magical beasts were extremely powerful. Wuming even had the idea that if they fought alone, Quizzard and Ishtar might not necessarily be the opponents of these magical beasts. However, their goal was not to kill these 11 magical beasts. As long as they delayed these magical beasts and let Wuming deal with Tiamat during this time, everything would be over. However, these magical beasts seemed to be quite smart. After the 5 magical beasts left for the Uruk, the remaining 6 magical beasts all rushed towards Wuming. Only Wuming had the ability to threaten Tiamat, which the magical beasts knew very well. However, Wuming appeared next to Gratzi with a teleportation portal, causing the 6 magical beasts to miss their target. Assassin, what should we do now? Gratzi was a little anxious at this moment. However, there was no other way because Roman had been relaying information about the enemy. Each of these 11 magical beasts has magical power comparable to or even surpassing the Holy Grail. Their strength has even reached the level of the King of Gods. Even Quizzard, the Quetzalcoatl, has a very low chance of winning against one of them. If the goddess Ishtar faces one of them, she is likely to be killed. It's really over this time? Roman's anxious and panicked voice kept coming out of Gratzi's bracelet. Are these magical beasts so powerful? Matthew was also shocked. After all, she was still immature. She could only sense that these magical beasts were very dangerous, but she did not know how dangerous they were. Don't forget that even Ishtar's father is Tiamat's grandson. These magical beasts are Tiamat's sons. It's understandable that they have the power of the King of Gods. Wuming's words were not unreasonable. If Tiamat's magical beasts were weak, then they were not qualified to fight against the heavenly gods. After all, they would be killed directly by the heavenly gods. Being able to fight against the heavenly gods meant that the 11 sons of Tiamat were very powerful. It could only be said that the previous magical beast commanders were the weaker versions of these 11 magical beasts, and the mass-produced magical beasts were the extremely weak versions of these 11 magical beasts. These 11 magical beasts were the 11 sons of Tiamat. No, it should be strengthened by the black mud. Otherwise, Tiamat would not have given birth to these the 11 sons so quickly, and these the 11 sons would not have such powerful strength. It could be said that if these 11 magical beasts replaced the original the 11 sons, the scales of victory might have tilted towards Tiamat's side. Therefore, these magical beasts must have been strengthened by the black mud. Assassin, go directly to Tiamat. We'll hold these magical beasts back. Grazzi made a prompt decision and issued an order. However, as a master, Grazzi was still too inexperienced. However, Wu Ming shook his head. It's impossible for you to beat these guys. You won't even be able to drag it out for long. Not to mention anything else, Grazzi's combat power was 0. Even if Matthew was included, excluding Wu Ming, there were only 5 of them, and there were 6 magical beasts here. Roman's words just now were very clear. Quizzard's chances of winning were very low, and Ishtar might even be killed directly. There was one more thing that Roman didn't mention. Even Merlin could only rely on illusion to survive. It was difficult to win in a 1-on-1 situation, let alone a 5-on-6 situation. What's more, there was another extremely frustrating thing. 5 against 6 was just a hypothesis, because Matthew, Nwakamaru, and Musasobo Benkei were useless at this moment. Therefore, the real situation was actually 2 against 6. Chapter 10:18. Then what do we do now? Everyone turned their attention to Wu Ming, including Merlin. Wu Ming looked at the 6 magical beasts that were charging at them again, thought for a moment, and then said something that made everyone dumbfounded. I'll hold off these 6 magical beasts, you guys go snipe Tiamat. As soon as he said that, everyone's eyes widened. Wait a minute, you're going to deal with 6 magical beasts? Grazzi said worriedly. The strength of these magical beasts was obvious to all. This was no joke. I'm afraid we can't kill Tiamat. This sentence came from Merlin. The 6 magical beasts only attacked Wu Ming and ignored the others. This meant that only Wu Ming had the ability to threaten Tiamat. If they couldn't even defeat these magical beasts, how could they deal with Tiamat? There was another point that others didn't know, but Merlin knew very well. First, Hassan couldn't even get close to Tiamat now, let alone them. Without the strength, they probably couldn't even get close. How could they fight? However, Wu Ming's words changed. That's why I asked you guys to snipe. That's right, Wu Ming didn't think that they could get close to Tiamat, but they didn't need to, they could just snipe from afar. Immediately, everyone turned their attention to Ishtar. Fe? Ishtar was stunned at first, then held her head and looked like she was about to break down. Wait a minute, I can't even defeat these magical beasts, how can I deal with Tiamat? Ishtar's eyes were filled with tears, and she looked like she was going to die. This was a good reason, but don't you still have Gugalana? Wu Ming spread his hands, and suddenly looked like he didn't care. TSK. Suddenly, Ishtar's body froze. However, Grazzi and Matthew looked happy. Right, I almost forgot that Miss Ishtar has the bowl of heaven. Ishtar, it's up to you now. The 2 of them cheered Ishtar on. If it doesn't work, we'll just use Gugalan to escape and switch places with me. Without waiting for Ishtar's response, Wu Ming turned around and flew downwards. Because the 6 magical beasts had already arrived. Good luck, Mistress of the Heavens, Ishtar. I have high hopes for you. After Wu Ming said some words of encouragement, he directly started fighting with the 6 magical beasts. There's no time to lose. Let's go over first. At that moment, Quizzard also seized the opportunity created by Wu Ming and commanded the pterosaurs to fly towards Tiamat. Wait a minute. Ishtar's sorrowful cries served as a prelude to the battle between Wu Ming and the 6 magical beasts. On the Uruk side, Gilgamesh had already returned to the top of the divine tower. He did not do anything and just closed his eyes and waited quietly. Enkidu and Funbaba were playing by the side, while Leonidas I, Anna, and the leopard man stayed on the southwest wall of the Uruk. At some point, Gilgamesh's aura changed, and then Enkidu spoke. "Gil, what are you worried about?" However, Gilgamesh, who opened his eyes, shook his head. "It's just a bunch of random thoughts." In response, Enkidu smiled mysteriously. In that case, Enkidu decided to change the topic. "Sir Hyunryong will definitely succeed. We just need to protect the Uruk, or rather, protect you, the king of humans in this era. It's about time." Gilgamesh, who was leaning against the throne, rested his face on his arm and glanced toward the southwest. Boom! The sound of a boulder hitting the ground echoed in the sky, and the entire Uruk was shaken. "Looks like it's here." Enkidu stopped smiling and hugged Funbaba. That's right, both Enkidu and Gilgamesh knew that the Uruk would definitely be attacked. Enkidu's judgment came from following Wuming, while Gilgamesh's judgment was purely clairvoyant. "Let's go, Enkidu. This king wants to see how those beasts attack this king's Uruk," Gilgamesh said, standing up with the help of the handrail and walking down the steps. In response, Enkidu smiled helplessly. "I told you to stay on the city wall, and now you want to go over. Idiot, how can this king stay on the front line all the time?" Although Gilgamesh said so, as his only friend, Enkidu knew that Gilgamesh needed to rest after coming back. Gilgamesh just took a nap, and the reason why Enkidu took the initiative to speak was because he sensed that Gilgamesh was awake. As Gilgamesh's only friend, Enkidu could sense Gilgamesh's condition even through his aura. "Okay, let's go." Enkidu, who also understood that Gilgamesh was at Sundara, stopped discussing this topic and followed Gilgamesh with Funbaba in his arms. Outside the southwest city wall of the Uruk, near Nabistan's Fong, 5 huge monsters were constantly destroying Nabistan's Fong, trying to let the sea of black mud flow through. Nabistan's Fong was not strong enough to withstand the attacks of these 5 monsters. Just the collision of their bodies was enough to destroy Nabistan's Fong. The sea of black mud began to move toward the Uruk, and some fragments of Nabistan's Fong that were scattered on the sea of black mud were picked up by one of the monsters. This was a huge bull with a pair of fierce horns. It was Catholic, one of the 11 sons of Tiamat. Obviously, even if Catholic transformed from his human form to his beast form, he was still the strongest among the 11 sons. No, it should be said that he was stronger in his beast form. He was holding a sharp fragment of Nabistan's Fong, and he suddenly threw his head toward the Uruk sky. Whoosh! The fragment rushed toward the Uruk at high speed like a bullet. When the fragment reached the highest point, it began to fall in an arc, and then directly entered the light film of the Uruk. It fell heavily in an open space, smashing a big hole. In the middle of the street not far away, there was also a big hole, and in the hole was another fragment of Nabistan's Fong. Obviously, these 2 fragments had entered the Uruk through the same method. But fortunately, these 2 fragments happened to fall in an open space or even on the street, so there were no casualties. As for the humans in the Uruk, under the guidance of the soldiers, they were constantly retreating toward the central tower. A beautiful woman wearing a veil was saying something loudly. "Hurry up, everyone, we'll be safe once we enter the tower." This was Siduri, and she was also giving orders. The underground of the tower had space for thousands of people to temporarily take refuge. Although it was a little difficult to let everyone in the Uruk take refuge in it, the other rooms on the ground of the tower could also be used for refuge. As the central building of the Uruk, the tower was naturally strong. As long as they didn't hide on a floor that was too high, even if the fragment of Nabistan's Fong fell, it wouldn't cause any harm to the people hiding in it. At the thought that the people would soon be safe, Siduri couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. However, at this moment, a sound of something breaking through the air came from above Siduri's head. Siduri couldn't help but look up. It was another fragment of Nabistan's Fong. And the landing site was where she was. Chapter 10:19. However, Before the fragment landed, a purple figure leaped towards the fragment. With a flash of a blade, the fragment turned into fragments and fell to the ground. Are you all right? Anna's figure landed in front of Siduri. Her scythe indicated that it was Anna who saved Siduri. I'm fine, Miss Anna. Thank you so much. Siduri bowed to Anna to express her gratitude. Let's leave quickly. The Uruk is in danger now. Anna blushed and turned her head away. She couldn't help but put on her hood. Yes, Miss Anna should be careful too. However, Siduri didn't retreat in the direction of the tower. Instead, she ran towards the crowd. She needed to guide the crowd. This was not only her duty as a witch chief, but also her duty as a human to help her fellow humans. Seeing that Siduri was covering some of the frightened crowd while leaving, Anna took off her hood. That's why I hate humans the most. However, Anna's heart was the complete opposite of what she said. However, she didn't have time to sigh. A few more fragments fell from the sky. Anna jumped up again and prepared to use her undying slaughter blade, Hepar, to cut these fragments into pieces one by one. However, these were still fragments of Nabistan's Fong. It was difficult for Anna to cut them into pieces. However, if she didn't cut them into pieces, the fragments would destroy the surroundings and affect the people who hadn't retreated in time. Not good. Finally, something unexpected happened. A smaller fragment followed behind a larger one. Anna didn't notice it because she wasn't paying attention. Anna, who thought that she had cut the last fragment of Nabistan's Fong, was gradually falling to the ground. At this moment, a tiger's roar echoed through the sky. Roar. Kacha, bang. Finally, the last piece of debris was completely shattered. Along with Anna, a yellow leopard fell to the ground. Although she made a tiger's roar, as expected, we still have to rely on the warriors of the forest. The great leopard man. Roar. Anna looked at the leopard man in disdain. She didn't say anything. After all, it was a fact that he helped her. Anna turned to look at the sky. It was definitely not a coincidence that the two fragments had overlapped. Anna was very sure of this. Then, there was only one explanation. The enemy's intelligence isn't lower than humans. As expected of Tiamat's magical beast, Gilgamesh said as he walked over with Enkidu, who was holding Finbaba. He and Enki both saw what happened just now, and he also saw that it was the doing of those 5 magic beasts. Because it's a pure physical attack, the light barrier didn't have any effect. It seems like the opponent is very clear about the defensive means of the light barrier. Gilgamesh couldn't help but frown. It wasn't scary that the enemy was strong. What was scary was that the enemy was strong and smart. At this moment, the 5 magical beasts outside were such enemies. The magical beasts this time are fundamentally different from the previous ones. Let's go. Follow this king to the city wall to take a look. As for the fragments falling from the sky, Gilgamesh had already activated a few divine power seals, Dinger, which were enough to destroy the fragments of Nabistan's Fong. Although the civilians and soldiers had entered the holy tower to take refuge, Gilgamesh could easily activate a few divine power seals, Dinger, by himself. He didn't need any soldiers. Plus, now that all the humans were gathered in the holy tower, even if 1 or 2 fragments fell, it wouldn't be a big deal. The only thing left was to take care of the 5 magical beasts that kept throwing fragments of Nabistan's Fong at the Uruk. Because the journey wasn't far, Gilgamesh and the others soon arrived at the city wall. The magical beasts probably realized that throwing fragments of Nabistan's Fong was no longer effective. Plus, they had basically used up all the fragments of Nabistan's Fong. Hence, the magical beasts completely gave up on the idea. However, more importantly, because of the damage to Nabistan's Fong, the sea of black mud had arrived in front of the Uruk. Although the light membrane protecting the Uruk was Wuming's noble artifact, the sea of black mud was created by Tiamat's authority. Even Gilgamesh doubted that the light membrane enveloping the Uruk could stop the sea of black mud. However, Gilgamesh believed that even if it couldn't stop it, it could still stop it for a while. As long as Wuming killed Tiamat in a while, everything would be fine. Sure enough, when the sea of black mud came into contact with the light membrane, the two seemed to have a chemical reaction. The light membrane sizzled and flashed like an alarm. Although the sea of black mud didn't enter the Uruk, it seemed that the light membrane wouldn't last long. However, at this moment, Gilgamesh and Enkidu suddenly sensed something and looked at somewhere in the sky in disbelief. There, a petite figure with a strong divinity suddenly appeared. Earth wave. Accompanied by a delicate but firm voice, the ground around the Uruk suddenly changed. The soil outside the Uruk became active like an ocean. It directly cut off the sea of black mud from the ground and formed a trapezoidal dam, blocking the sea of black mud outside. The sea of black mud that was cut off between the Uruk and the dam was transported by the soil and thrown back. This divinity, Gilgamesh showed an interesting expression. It's Lord Hyunryong's, Enkidu said. However, compared to Gilgamesh, Enkidu was more familiar with the person who used this power. The petite figure in the sky was Wuming's younger sister, Shutsuki Meiyu. On Wuming's side, Wuming, who didn't know about Meiyu's arrival, was contending with the 6 magic beasts while covering for Gadatsi and the others as they left. Looking in the direction in which Gadatsi and the others left, Wuming could no longer see them. Only then did he look at the 6 magic beasts seriously. The magic beasts left behind to deal with Wuming were not simple. Kitabliru, Kuru, Umdabru, Basumuuj, and Ram. The first 5 magic beasts were among the strongest among the 11 magic beasts. However, Ramu caught Wuming's attention more. Apart from other reasons, the existence that was like a strengthened version of Ramu was like the center of the magic beasts. How could Wuming not pay attention to it? Moreover, when Gadatsi and the others left, Ramu just waved its hand lightly. Hundreds of winged Ramu flew out from the sea of black mud below and flew in the direction that Gadatsi and the others left. This guy actually had magic beasts that could fly. How could Wuming not be shocked? Chapter 10:20. It seemed that even if Wuming stayed behind, the other party still wouldn't allow anyone to get close to Tiamat. But fortunately, it was only some winged Ramu that dealt with Gadatsi and the others, and not the 11 magical beasts. Although those mass-produced Ramu weren't weak, they were still too weak compared to the 11 magical beasts, so Wuming believed that Gadatsi and the others would be fine. There were 2 reasons why Wuming let Gadatsi and the others deal with Tiamat. First of all, Gadatsi and the others definitely wouldn't be able to kill Tiamat. And Wuming instructed Ishtar to attack from a distance only to give Gadatsi and the others a way out. After all, it would be easier for them to escape by pulling the distance. And why did Wuming let Gadatsi and the others go even though he knew that they couldn't kill Tiamat? The second reason was that Wuming wanted to take advantage of this time to kill these 6 magical beasts. So no matter what, Wuming had to speed up during the time when Gadatsi and the others were away and try to kill these 6 magical beasts as quickly as possible. After all, it was impossible for them to defeat the magical beasts, and even the survival of Gadatsi and the others was a problem. So these 6 magical beasts must all be eliminated by Wuming. Even if they couldn't kill all of them, they had to leave a number that Gadatsi and the others could deal with before turning to deal with Tiamat. And next, Wuming had to use the power of God to deal with this group of children of the Creator. And the first to bear the brunt was Ramu. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people, all fear me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people can't hit me. As the words were chanted, Wuming's figure suddenly disappeared. However, in the next second, Wuming's figure appeared in front of Ramu, who was standing among the other magical beasts. And Wuming had already stretched out his right hand and grabbed Ramu's head. The speed brought by the phoenix incarnation wasn't something that magical beasts could react to. After all, the phoenix incarnation was related to time, so how could it let the other party react? In an instant, Wuming came into contact with seraphic speed and chanted another word. I am the strongest, and I hold all the victory in my hands. No matter if it's a human or a demon, I will defeat any enemy who is in my way. Puchi. Like crushing a watermelon, Lachmu's head, which Wu Ming was grabbing, was crushed by Wu Ming's arm, which was filled with the power of a giant. Purple blood splattered everywhere, but not a single drop landed on Wu Ming's body. Wu Ming had already set up a telekinesis wall in front of him. Roar! Roar! Roar, roar, roar! Roar, roar! Ramu's sudden death scared the other magical beasts. In their senses, Wu Ming disappeared in an instant, Ramu's head exploded, and Wu Ming appeared among the 5 magical beasts. Giant with unparalleled divine power, please help me. With the words, a giant golden arm attached to Wu Ming's left hand. Then Wu Ming suddenly turned around and waved the giant golden arm around, and the 5 magical beasts were suddenly thrown out. Looking at the 5 magical beasts standing on the sea of black mud and surrounding Wu Ming turned off the giant incarnation, and the golden arm on his left hand disappeared. Thou hast violated the contract and brought evil to the world. Lord's Day, sinners will be punished. Then, holding Ramu's headless body, Wu Ming began to chant again. Crush its back, dig out its tendons, bones, hair, and brain, and trample on its blood and mud. If I am the one who cannot get close to the darkness, I will follow the words of the Lord and destroy thee. Suddenly, something like a black hole appeared on Ramu's headless body. In an instant, the body was sucked into the black hole and disappeared. Then, as if quite tired, Wu Ming shook his right hand. It must be said that Ramu's body was as tough as its appearance. It was far from being comparable to the mass-produced Ramu. Although Wu Ming easily crushed Ramu's head, it consumed a lot of Wu Ming's energy. Wu Ming's arm was also tired, otherwise, Wu Ming would not have changed his arm to attack the other 5 magical beasts. Wu Ming did not underestimate the 11 magical beasts. On the contrary, they were very important. After all, they came out of the sea of black mud. Using the phoenix incarnation that had never been used in front of magical beasts to get close to Ramu and catch it by surprise. Then, using the giant incarnation, coupled with a trace of the power of the source of the black mud, he successfully crushed Ramu's head. Finally, he used the annihilation incarnation to destroy Ramu's headless body. After all, a magical beast's vitality was very strong. However, Wu Ming could not guarantee that Ramu did not have any special abilities. Wu Ming was afraid that the headless Ramu could come back to life. These were enough to see Wu Ming's importance to Ramu, and Ramu died without playing any role. No, thinking about it carefully, it was still useful. The other 5 magical beasts knew about Wu Ming's methods. If Wu Ming wanted to use this method to kill other magical beasts, it would most likely not work. However, even so, it was worth it to kill Ramu, who gave Wu Ming a sense of importance. Rubbing his right wrist, Wu Ming looked at Baxiumu. Baxiumu was his next target. After all, Wu Ming had 12 incarnations. When Wu Ming killed a magical beast, Gudatzi's side did not have any accidents as Wu Ming expected. Although the mass-produced Ramu was powerful, and the mass-produced Ramu with wings was even more powerful, they were still not as good as the 11 magical beasts. Probably because Quizzard and Ishtar couldn't beat the 11 magical beasts, the 2 of them worked extra hard to deal with these mass-produced Ramu. Or it could be said that they were venting, die, 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 die. Ishtar frantically attacked the mass-produced Ramu with anima. With a face full of resentment, she kept muttering this sentence. Although she couldn't hit Ramu every time, as long as she hit Ramu, the opponent would be killed. This was enough to prove that Ishtar put a lot of magic into each attack. And Quizzard used the mass-produced Ramu as a stepping stone, constantly moving between the Ramu. And every time Quizzard moved, a Ramu would fall. These Ramu were directly killed by Quizzard's fatal wrestling skills. 2 goddesses, so scary, Gudatzi and Matthew looked at Ishtar and Quizzard with some fear and gulped. Nuakamaru and Musasobo Benkei quietly stayed on the pterosaur's back. Because the 2 goddesses were venting, although they didn't have a chance to attack, they had some free time. Almost all the enemies have been wiped out. Merlin laughed. Sure enough, after Merlin finished speaking, Gudatzi found that there was only 1 Ramu left. And it seemed to be dumbfounded, flying there motionlessly. But it didn't matter. Anyway, this Ramu had to face the 2 goddesses venting. When it finally reacted, it couldn't help but shudder. Then a golden light flashed, and it fell into darkness. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.